poor girl repairs a CEO's watch on the street, he falls in love and invites her to dinner. Then he sees a family photo in her bag and realizes she was his brother's ex-fiancée. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The bitter autumn wind slashed through Sophia's thin jacket like invisible knives as she hunched over her makeshift workstation on the street corner. Her fingers, red and swollen from the cold, meticulously manipulated the delicate gears of a vintage pocket watch, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. 3 years of horological training at a prestigious Swiss institute, a degree she'd worked double shifts to pay for, and here she was, fixing watches on a street corner in the financial district. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just across the street loomed the gleaming headquarters of Blackwood Enterprises, a corporate behemoth whose shadow seemed to stretch across the entire city. Inside that temple of glass and steel, executives made more money in a day than she'd see in months. Out here, she was lucky if she could cover this month's rent. A sudden gust tore through the street, scattering her tools across the weathered blanket she'd spread on the concrete. Sophia lunged forward, desperately trying to catch the tiny screws and springs before they disappeared into the sidewalk cracks, each one worth more than the meals she often skipped. That's when the polished Italian leather shoes entered her field of vision. Sophia stilled, her eyes traveling slowly upward. Tailored charcoal pants, a cashmere overcoat worth more than her apartment's security deposit, and finally, the face of its wearer. Sharp cheekbones, piercing gray eyes, and the unmistakable expression of someone accustomed to having the world bend to his will. Alexander Blackwood, the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises. The Ice King, as business magazines called him. She'd seen his face on enough financial papers to recognize him instantly. What she didn't recognize was the expression of genuine distress on his face. Alexander held an antique watch in his palm, its gold case gleaming despite the obvious damage to its face. "Can you fix this?" he asked, his voice lower and less commanding than she had imagined it would be. Sophia straightened her back, professional pride temporarily overriding her intimidation. "May I?" she asked, extending her hand. He placed the watch in her palm, and she immediately recognized the craftsmanship. A 1920s Patek Philippe, museum quality. The crystal was cracked, the hour hand bent at an unnatural angle. "It's my grandfather's," Alexander explained, the hardness in his eyes softening slightly. "It stopped working this morning." Sophia nodded, already assessing the damage. "The movement is Swiss. I trained in Geneva," she said, more to herself than to him. She gently opened the case, revealing the intricate mechanism inside. "The balance staff is broken. I can fix it, but I'll need about an hour." Alexander checked his modern wristwatch, a gesture of a man whose time was measured in thousands of dollars per minute. He seemed to make a calculation before nodding. "Fix it." He didn't ask about the cost, Sophia noticed. Men like him never did. She worked methodically, her fingers gradually warming as she lost herself in the familiar rhythm of watchmaking. The world around her faded, the honking traffic, the rushing pedestrians, even the imposing presence of Alexander Blackwood, who had decided to wait, standing a few feet away, occasionally checking emails on his phone. "Why here?" he asked suddenly, breaking her concentration. Sophia looked up, confused. "Excuse me? Why are you fixing watches on a street corner instead of in a proper shop?" She returned her attention to the delicate mechanism. "Because proper shops require proper capital, Mr. Blackwood. You know who I am. Everyone knows who you are." She carefully aligned the balance wheel. "My shop closed 6 months ago. Couldn't afford the rent increase after your company bought the building." The silence that followed was heavier than before. "You owned Timekeeper on Sullivan Street?" There was genuine surprise in his voice. "I did." Sophia didn't look up, focusing instead on carefully straightening the hour hand with specialized pliers. along with every other small business owner who couldn't keep up with the market adjustment your property management division implemented. Alexander shifted his weight, the leather of his shoes creaking slightly. Those decisions are made by the real estate division. I don't oversee every detail. Of course not. Sophia finally looked up, meeting his gaze directly. But it's your name on the building. Something flickered across Alexander's face. Not anger, as she might have expected, but something more complex. Before he could respond, she returned her attention to the watch, making final adjustments to the crown. It's done. She closed the case with a satisfying click, polished the crystal with a microfiber cloth, and held it out to him. It should keep perfect time now. Alexander took the watch, his fingers brushing against hers. He wound it carefully, held it to his ear, and a ghost of a smile touched his lips at the steady tick-tick-tick. "How much do I owe you?" he asked, reaching for his wallet. Sophia named her price, fair for the work, but probably what he spent on coffee each morning. Alexander withdrew a bill that was 10 times her quote. "This is your expertise. You should value it accordingly." She stared at the money, pride warring with practicality. The practical side won. Rent was due, and pride wouldn't keep her warm. "Thank you," she said, tucking it away. He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "You have remarkable talent." "Not remarkable enough to survive in your world, apparently." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Instead of being offended, Alexander studied her with newfound interest. "Have dinner with me tonight." Sophia blinked, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "Dinner, to discuss your work." He gestured at her makeshift workshop. "You clearly deserve better than this." Her laugh was sharp and disbelieving. "Is this how billionaires assuage their guilt? Fine dining for the displaced?" "This is how businessmen recognize opportunity," he countered smoothly. 7 o'clock, Luciel. My driver will pick you up." He paused. "Unless you're afraid of a dinner conversation." It was a challenge, artfully delivered. Sophia's eyes narrowed. "I'm not afraid of you, Mr. Blackwood." "Alexander," he corrected. "And good. Text your address to this number." He handed her a business card with his private cell. "I'll send a car." Before she could formulate a response, he was gone, striding down the sidewalk with the confidence of a man who expected the world to fall in line behind him. Sophia looked down at the card in her hand, embossed with the Blackwood Enterprises logo. This was madness. Dinner with Alexander Blackwood, the man whose company had systematically devoured small businesses like hers? Yet as she packed up her tools, she couldn't deny the flutter of curiosity. What could he possibly want from her? And more practically, a dinner at Le Ciel meant warmth, food, and possibly an opportunity she couldn't yet imagine. She texted her address before she could change her mind. The car arrived precisely at 6:30, a sleek black Bentley that drew stares from her neighbors in the rundown apartment building. The driver, an older man with a kind face, opened the door with practiced precision. "Miss Moore," he said with a respectful nod, "Mr. Blackwood is waiting at the restaurant." Sophia smoothed down the only dress she owned suitable for a place like Le Ciel, a simple black sheath she'd worn to countless job interviews. She'd spent the afternoon meticulously repairing a loose hem and polishing her worn but elegant heels. Her long auburn hair, usually confined in a practical bun, fell in soft waves around her shoulders, a small effort at femininity she rarely bothered with these days. The car glided through the city streets, from her neighborhood of discount stores and pawn shops to the glittering downtown where each storefront displayed luxury goods that cost more than her annual income. Sophia felt the familiar pang of displacement, the sensation of being caught between worlds, belonging to neither. Le Ciel occupied the top floor of one of the city's most exclusive buildings. As the elevator ascended, Sophia focused on her breathing, pushing down the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her. She wasn't some wide-eyed girl intimidated by wealth. She was a master craftswoman, trained in one of the most prestigious institutes in the world. Her skills were rare, valuable, if only the market agreed. "Miss Moore," the maitre d' greeted her with practiced deference. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting you." He led her through the dimly lit restaurant, past tables of beautiful people engaged in beautiful conversations, to a private alcove overlooking the city. Alexander stood as she approached, and Sophia was struck by how different he looked in this setting, less the corporate titan and more simply a man, albeit an exceptionally handsome one. "You came," he said, and there was a note of genuine pleasure in his voice. "I was curious," she admitted. Alexander pulled out her chair. "About?" "About what the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises could possibly want from a watchmaker without a shop." A smile touched his lips as he took his seat across from her. "Direct. I appreciate that." The sommelier appeared, presenting a bottle for approval. Alexander barely glanced at it before nodding. "Miss Moore prefers red or white?" "Red," Sophia answered, though her experience with fine wines was limited at best. The waiter poured a small amount for Alexander to taste. He sipped it, nodded, and soon crystal glasses were filled with ruby liquid that caught the candlelight. "To new acquaintances," Alexander said, raising his glass. Sophia raised hers but didn't drink. "Why am I here, Mr. Blackwood?" "Alexander," he corrected again. "And that's simple. I want to offer you a job." Sophia's hand stilled. "A job?" "Blackwood recently acquired a struggling Swiss watchmaking company, Kronos. Perhaps you're familiar with it?" Sophia's heart skipped. Every watchmaker knew Kronos, a once legendary brand that had fallen into obscurity over the last decade. "You bought Kronos?" Alexander nodded. "We need someone who understands both the technical and aesthetic elements of fine watchmaking to revitalize the brand. Someone with vision and traditional training." His eyes met hers. "Someone like you." Sophia set down her glass carefully. "You know nothing about me. I know you were trained at the Geneva Institute of Horology, graduated top of your class. I know you opened Timekeeper 3 years ago to critical acclaim in industry publications. I know you specialize in restoration of antique timepieces." He took a sip of his wine. "I had my assistant research you while you were fixing my grandfather's watch." "Efficient," Sophia murmured, unsettled by how much he'd learned in such a short time. "That's what I pay people for." His expression grew more serious. "What I couldn't research was your passion, but I saw that firsthand today, the way you handled that watch, with reverence, understanding. That can't be taught." The waiter appeared with their first course, delicate morsels of art arranged on porcelain. Sophia looked down at food that cost more than her weekly grocery budget. "And what if I'm not interested in corporate work?" she asked, picking up her fork. "Then you'd be a fool," Alexander replied bluntly. "You'd be turning down the opportunity to design watches that could become heirlooms, to work with materials and craftsmen most watchmakers only dream of accessing. While helping rebuild a brand for Blackwood profit margins," she added. "Business is about profit," he acknowledged without apology. "But the best business recognizes value beyond immediate returns. Kronos has heritage, reputation." "Had," Sophia corrected. "They've been making mediocre mass-market pieces for years." A gleam of approval flashed in Alexander's eyes. "Exactly why we need someone with your standards and vision. You understand what makes a timepiece exceptional." Sophia took a small bite, the flavors exploding across her tongue. She chewed slowly, considering his words. What would the position entail exactly? "Creative director of watchmaking. You'd oversee design, quality control, train staff in traditional techniques, full creative autonomy with appropriate budget." "And appropriate compensation?" Sophia asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Alexander named a figure that nearly made her choke on her wine. "That's market value for your expertise," he finished smoothly, "plus relocation to Geneva, living accommodations, travel allowance." Geneva. the city where she'd spent the happiest years of her life training in the art she loved, before debt and reality had forced her back. "Why me?" Sophia asked, her voice quieter. "There are dozens of master watchmakers with more established reputations." Alexander studied her for a moment. "Because when I handed you a broken watch worth more than some homes, you didn't see its value. You saw its soul." He leaned forward slightly. "That's rare, Sophia. As rare as what you can do with your hands." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and something in his tone made her look up and truly see him, not the billionaire CEO, but the man across the table, whose eyes held genuine admiration. Dangerous territory, she warned herself. "I'll need to see the contract," she said, retreating to practicality. "And time to consider." "Of course," Alexander signaled for the next course. "But first, dinner. We have all evening to discuss watches, Geneva, and your future at Blackwood." As the meal progressed, Sophia found herself drawn into conversation about horology, art, and the cities they'd both loved. Alexander was surprisingly knowledgeable about watchmaking history, asking questions that revealed genuine interest rather than polite conversation. By dessert, Sophia realized with alarm that she was enjoying herself, and worse, starting to see Alexander Blackwood as a person rather than the corporate entity she'd resented. It was nearly midnight when they finally left the restaurant. The city below twinkled like a reflection of the stars hidden by urban light pollution. "My driver will take you home," Alexander said as they waited for the elevator. "And Sophia?" He held out a small case. "A token of appreciation for repairing my grandfather's watch." She opened it hesitantly. Inside was a woman's watch, elegant, vintage, with a mother-of-pearl face and delicate hands. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "It hasn't worked in years." Sophia looked up in surprise. "You're giving this to me?" "I'm entrusting it to you," he corrected. "Perhaps you can make it tick again." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, a possibility. As the elevator doors opened, Sophia knew that agreeing to dinner had already changed the course of her life. What remained to be seen was whether that change would be for better or worse. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Sophia's apartment, illuminating its sparse furnishings. She sat cross-legged on her bed, Alexander's grandmother's watch laid carefully on a cloth before her, along with her specialized tools. She'd been up since dawn, examining the delicate timepiece with the reverence Alexander had noted. The watch was a masterpiece of 1940s craftsmanship, a lady's Vacheron Constantin with hand-engraved flourishes along its gold case. Someone had attempted repairs before, clumsily. Amateur hands had damaged the escapement and balance spring. Sophia worked methodically, losing herself in the familiar ritual. This was what she loved, bringing mechanical poetry back to life, one precise movement at a time. 3 hours passed in what felt like minutes. When the watch finally began to tick, a smile spread across her face. The sound was strong and even, a heartbeat restored after decades of silence. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand, interrupting her moment of triumph. Alexander's private number flashed on the screen. "Good morning, Sophia." His voice sounded different over the phone, warmer, less formal. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "I've been up for hours," she replied, tucking the phone between her ear and shoulder as she carefully closed the watch case. "Your grandmother's watch is working again." A pause. "Already? That's remarkable." The damage was significant but fixable. Whoever tried to repair it before lacked the proper tools and knowledge. "Much like Kronos itself," Alexander said, "mishandled by people who understood its value but not its essence." Sophia smiled despite herself. A fitting metaphor. "I'm sending over the contract today with my lawyer, but I'd like to discuss the position further. Are you free for lunch?" Sophia glanced around her apartment. at the past due notices on her small table, at the worn carpet and peeling paint. One dinner with Alexander Blackwood had already shown her glimpses of a world she'd once dreamed of returning to. The world of fine horology and artistic creation rather than survival repairs on a street corner. "Yes," she said, "I'm free." "Excellent. My driver will pick you up at noon." He paused again. "And Sophia? Bring your portfolio if you have one. I'd like to see more of your work." After hanging up, Sophia moved to the small closet that held her meager wardrobe. Behind her everyday clothes hung a garment bag she rarely opened anymore. Inside was a small collection of pieces from her better days, when Timekeeper had been featured in luxury magazines and she'd been invited to horological conferences across Europe. She selected a simple navy dress with a tailored blazer, professional but not trying too hard. As she dressed, her gaze fell on her work bag, where the corner of a photograph peeked out from an inner pocket. She hesitated, then carefully tucked it deeper inside, out of sight. Some memories were better left undisturbed. Alexander was waiting at a private table at Maison, a French bistro that managed to be both elegant and unpretentious. He stood when she approached, his eyes quickly taking in her appearance with evident approval. "You look like the creative director you're about to become," he said, pulling out her chair. Sophia placed her portfolio case on the table. "I haven't accepted the position yet." "But you will." It wasn't a question. Alexander signaled the waiter for water. "You need Kronos as much as it needs you." "Presumptuous," Sophia remarked, though without real irritation. "Strategic," he countered. "You have extraordinary talent that's being wasted on a street corner. I have a legendary brand that's being wasted on mediocre design and poor execution. It's simple mathematics." The waiter arrived with water and menus. Alexander didn't open his, apparently already knowing what he wanted. Sophia scanned the options, quietly relieved to find prices that, while still expensive, wouldn't equate to a week's groceries. "Tell me about your brother," she said suddenly, surprising even herself with the question. Alexander's expression changed subtly. A tightening around the eyes, a slight tension in his jaw. "James? Why do you ask?" "I've read about Blackwood Enterprises. It's a family company, isn't it? You and your brother are both executives." Alexander took a sip of water. "James oversees our European operations, based in Geneva, which is relevant to you as you'd be working closely with him if you accept the position." Something in his tone suggested complexity. Sophia treaded carefully. "And what is he like to work with?" A faint smile touched Alexander's lips. "James is charming, brilliant with people, less concerned with operational details than I am." He set down his glass. "We complement each other well in business, despite our differences." "Differences?" Alexander's eyes met hers. "I build things, Sophia. James enjoys them." A pause. "But we're here to discuss your future, not my family dynamics. May I?" He gestured to her portfolio. Sophia nodded, watching as he opened the leather case with careful hands. Inside were photographs of her most intricate restorations, alongside designs for original pieces she'd created during her time at the Geneva Institute and after. Alexander studied each page methodically, occasionally asking questions about techniques or materials. His understanding impressed her. He wasn't merely a businessman looking at potential products, but someone who genuinely appreciated the artistry. "This one," he said, pausing at a design for a women's watch with an unusual moon phase complication. "It's remarkable. The integration of the lunar cycle into the overall aesthetic without compromising readability." His finger traced the drawing. "Was this ever produced?" Sophia shook her head. "It was too complex for my small shop's capabilities. The crystal alone would have required specialized cutting techniques." "But Kronos could produce it." Alexander looked up. "With the right leadership and investment." "Theoretically," she agreed cautiously. Their food arrived, a simple but perfectly executed coq au vin for Sophia, steak frites for Alexander. They ate in companionable silence for a few moments. "Why watches?" Alexander asked finally. "Out of all possible crafts, why did you choose horology?" Sophia considered the question, her fork pausing midway to her mouth. "My grandfather," she said after a moment. "He repaired clocks in a small shop in Lyon. I would spend summers with him, watching his hands bring these mechanical creatures back to life." Her expression softened at the memory. "He said that watchmakers don't just measure time, they give it meaning. Each watch carries the heartbeat of its maker, ticking on long after they're gone." Alexander was watching her intently, his food forgotten. "And that resonated with you?" "Completely. I was 14 when he let me restore my first pocket watch. The feeling when it started ticking again..." She shook her head slightly. "Nothing has ever compared." "Your parents didn't share this passion?" A shadow crossed Sophia's face. "My father thought it was a waste of potential. He wanted me to study business like him. When I chose the Geneva Institute instead, he cut me off financially." She gave a small shrug. "We haven't spoken since." "Hence the student loans that forced you back from Geneva," Alexander deduced. Sophia nodded, surprised he'd made the connection. "Life is expensive. Dreams, even more so." "Dreams are investments," Alexander corrected. "Some simply take longer to mature." Their eyes met across the table, and Sophia felt an unexpected warmth spreading through her chest. There was something about the way Alexander saw the world, as a series of possibilities rather than limitations, that both intimidated and attracted her. Dangerous territory, she reminded herself again. "The contract," she said, deliberately changing the subject. "You mentioned your lawyer would bring it today?" "He should be arriving shortly." Alexander checked his watch, a simple Patek Philippe that probably cost more than everything Sophia owned. "In the meantime, I'd like to hear your thoughts on Kronos's current collections." Sophia didn't hold back. She outlined the brand's decline from innovative luxury to derivative mediocrity, pointing out specific design choices that had eroded its identity. Alexander listened without defensiveness, occasionally making notes on his phone. "Brutal but accurate," he said when she finished. "This is exactly why we need you." A man in an impeccable suit approached their table carrying a leather portfolio. "Mr. Blackwood, the documents you requested." Alexander introduced his lawyer, who laid out the contract with efficient precision. Sophia read through the terms carefully, aware of both men watching her. The position was exactly as Alexander had described: creative director of watchmaking for Kronos, with substantial creative control, resources, and compensation. It was everything she'd ever wanted professionally. The relocation package includes a fully furnished apartment in Geneva's Old Town, the lawyer explained, plus transportation of your personal effects and a settling-in allowance. Geneva, the city where she'd spent her happiest years, and also the city where... Sophia pushed the thought away. "When would you need my decision?" "Ideally, by the end of the week," Alexander said. "We'd like you to start as soon as possible." The lawyer excused himself after Sophia promised to review the contract thoroughly and respond within the time frame. As he departed, Alexander's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "I need to take this. Excuse me for a moment." As Alexander stepped away from the table, Sophia took the opportunity to absorb what was happening. Yesterday, she'd been fixing watches on a street corner, struggling to make rent. Today, she was being offered a dream position that would return her to the world she loved. It seemed too perfect, too convenient. Yet Alexander's interest in her skills appeared genuine, and the contract was more than fair. It was generous. Her thoughts were interrupted when Alexander returned, his expression tighter than before. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Family business," he said dismissively. "Nothing for you to worry about." He glanced at his watch. "Unfortunately, I need to cut our lunch short." An unexpected situation requires my attention. Of course, Sophia said, gathering her portfolio. Take your time with the contract. If you have questions, call me directly. He signaled for the check. And Sophia, I meant what I said about your talent. Don't let pride stand in the way of opportunity. Outside the restaurant, as they waited for their respective cars, Alexander turned to her. I'm hosting a charity gala at my home tomorrow evening. I'd like you to attend. Meet some key people from the industry who'll be there, potential colleagues. I don't have anything appropriate to wear to a gala, Sophia admitted. That's easily remedied. Alexander handed her a business card. Clara Simmons, my personal shopper. She'll help you find something suitable. It's part of your signing bonus. I haven't signed yet, Sophia pointed out. Alexander smiled, a genuine one that transformed his face. Consider it a gesture of good faith, then. His car arrived first, a sleek Aston Martin with a driver. Tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Clara will arrange everything. As she watched his car pull away, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that her life was accelerating beyond her control. The contract in her bag represented everything she'd worked toward: recognition, creative freedom, financial security. So why did a small voice in the back of her mind whisper caution? Her own car arrived, the same Bentley from yesterday, with the same kind-faced driver. "Where to, Miss Moore?" he asked as she settled into the back seat. Sophia hesitated, then gave her address. As the car navigated through the city, she found herself thinking not of the contract or the job, but of Alexander himself. The way his eyes had lit up examining her designs, the way he'd listened when she spoke of her grandfather, the unexpected depth beneath the polished CEO exterior. Her work bag shifted on the seat beside her, and the corner of the photograph peeked out once more, a silent reminder of another life, another connection. Sophia tucked it away firmly. The past was the past, and for the first time in years, her future held genuine promise. Clara Simmons was a whirlwind of efficiency wrapped in Chanel. Within hours of Sophia's call, she had transformed a private room at Bergdorf Goodman into a personalized boutique, with dresses, shoes, and accessories carefully selected for the occasion. Mr. Blackwood was quite specific, Clara explained, assessing Sophia with a professional eye. Elegant, but not ostentatious. You're to be presented as a respected artisan, not arm candy. Sophia raised an eyebrow at the phrasing but said nothing as Clara guided her through the options. They settled on a midnight blue gown with a simple silhouette that somehow managed to look both timeless and modern. The fabric shimmered subtly under the lights, reminiscent of the night sky. Perfect, Clara declared, her critical eye softening. The craftsmanship mirrors your own, subtle complexity rather than obvious showmanship. As they waited for alterations, Clara's phone chimed. She glanced at it, then back at Sophia with newfound interest. "Kronos," she said. "That's quite an undertaking." Sophia stiffened. News travels fast. Alexander never moves this quickly with acquisitions or personnel, Clara remarked, typing a response. "You must have made quite an impression." "It's my work he's impressed with," Sophia corrected. "Not me personally." Clara gave her a look that suggested she wasn't convinced. 14 years managing his personal affairs has taught me that with Alexander, those distinctions are never as clear as people think. She slipped her phone away. He protects what he values. Something in Clara's tone made Sophia uncomfortable. "We have a professional relationship." "Of course," Clara agreed smoothly. "Now about accessories. Simple diamonds, I think. Nothing competing with the craftsmanship of the dress." As Clara turned to consult with the saleswoman, Sophia caught her reflection in the three-way mirror. The woman staring back at her looked like someone from her past life, the promising young horologist with the world at her fingertips, not the street corner watchmaker struggling to survive. It was a dangerous illusion, she reminded herself. Designer dresses and charity galas didn't change who she was or what had happened in Geneva. Alexander's home was exactly what Sophia expected, a penthouse spanning the entire top floor of one of the city's most exclusive buildings. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased breathtaking views of the skyline, while the interior balanced masculine modernism with unexpected warmth in its wood and leather accents. Art adorned the walls, not the predictable status pieces of the newly wealthy, but thoughtfully curated works that spoke of genuine appreciation. Sophia recognized a rare Breguet carriage clock on a side table, its mechanism visible through crystal panels. "You approve?" Alexander appeared beside her, looking devastatingly handsome in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. "Of the Breguet? Absolutely, it's exquisite." "I meant the dress, but I'm pleased you noticed the clock." His eyes took in her appearance with undisguised appreciation. "Clara did well." "Too well," Sophia admitted. "I feel like I'm wearing someone else's life." Alexander's expression softened unexpectedly. "Sometimes the lives we think belong to others are actually the ones waiting for us to claim them." He offered his arm. "Come, there are people you should meet." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions. Alexander guided her through the crowd with practiced ease, introducing her to key figures in the luxury watch industry. Sophia was surprised to discover how many recognized her name. "Your restoration of the Patek Philippe annual calendar for the Geneva Museum was remarkable," said a Swiss manufacturer. "Such delicate work on the perpetual mechanism." "Your article on modern applications of traditional guilloche techniques was brilliant," commented the editor of a prestigious horological journal. "We'd love to commission another piece now that you're joining Kronos." Each conversation reinforced what Alexander had told her. Her reputation in the industry remained intact, despite her recent circumstances. These people didn't see a street-corner watchmaker, they saw a master craftswoman who was finally receiving her due. "See?" Alexander murmured as they moved between groups. "This world never forgot you, Sophia. It's been waiting for your return." Warmth spread through her chest at his words, a dangerous hope taking root despite her best efforts to remain detached. Being here, talking about the craft she loved with people who truly understood it. It felt like coming home. "Alexander!" A woman's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. "There you are, darling." They turned to see a statuesque blonde approaching, her crimson gown a stark contrast to Sophia's understated blue. She kissed Alexander's cheek with practiced familiarity, leaving a perfect lipstick mark that she immediately wiped away with a manicured thumb. "Victoria," Alexander acknowledged, his tone cooler than Sophia had heard it before. "I didn't expect you tonight." "Clearly," Victoria replied, her gaze sliding to Sophia with calculated assessment. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" "Sophia Moore, Victoria Winters," Alexander said. "Sophia is the new creative director for Kronos. Victoria is his fiancée." Victoria interjected smoothly, extending a hand adorned with a massive diamond. "Or I was, until recently." Sophia accepted the handshake, maintaining a neutral expression despite the unexpected revelation. "It's nice to meet you." "Ex-fiancé?" Alexander clarified, his jaw tightening. "And this isn't the venue for personal discussions, Victoria." Victoria's laugh was musical but sharp-edged. "Everything is business with you, isn't it, darling? Even the personal." Her eyes lingered on Sophia. "A word of advice, dear. Make sure you understand which category you fall into." Before either could respond, Victoria glided away, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume and unspoken tension in her wake. "I apologize for Victoria," Alexander said after a moment. "Our engagement ended awkwardly." "You don't owe me an explanation," Sophia replied, though questions burned in her mind. Alexander studied her face. "But I'd like to give you one nevertheless, just not here." He glanced at his watch. "I need to make a brief speech in 10 minutes. After that, perhaps we could find somewhere quieter to talk?" Sophia nodded, grateful for the opportunity to gather her thoughts. As Alexander was pulled away by an event coordinator, she made her way to the bar, requesting water instead of champagne. She needed clarity tonight, not the fuzzy comfort of alcohol. Sophia? Sophia Moore? The voice behind her was achingly familiar. Sophia turned slowly, already knowing who she would find. Marcus, she acknowledged, facing the bespectacled man who had been her mentor at the Geneva Institute. It's been a long time. 3 years, he confirmed, his Swiss accent as pronounced as she remembered. Since you left Geneva so abruptly. His kind eyes searched her face. You disappeared, my dear. No goodbyes, no forwarding address. Shame and old pain twisted in Sophia's stomach. I had my reasons. I'm sure you did. Marcus sipped his champagne. James Blackwood was quite distraught after your departure. He came looking for you at the Institute. Sophia's hand tightened around her water glass. That's in the past now. And yet here you are, at his brother's gala. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Does Alexander know about your history with James? There's nothing to know, Sophia said firmly. A brief relationship that ended. Nothing more. Marcus's expression suggested he didn't believe her, but he was too polite to contradict. Well, I'm pleased to see you returning to our world. Your talent was always too exceptional to waste. Sophia. Alexander appeared at her side, his hand coming to rest lightly at the small of her back. I see you've met Marcus. We're old acquaintances, Marcus explained, shaking Alexander's hand. I had the privilege of teaching Sophia at the Institute. Her skills were unmatched even then. That doesn't surprise me, Alexander replied. Would you excuse us, Marcus? I'm afraid I need to steal Sophia away for my speech. As Alexander guided her toward the center of the room, Sophia felt the weight of Marcus's gaze following them, knowing, concerned, a connection to a past she'd tried to bury. Alexander's speech was brief but compelling, outlining Blackwood's acquisition of Kronos and their commitment to restoring the brand's legacy of innovation and craftsmanship. When he introduced Sophia as the new creative director, a warm round of applause filled the room. She forced a smile, nodding in acknowledgement while her mind raced with the implications of running into Marcus. If he was here, others from Geneva might be as well. People who knew about her and James. As the formal portion of the evening concluded, Alexander led her to a private terrace overlooking the city. The autumn air was crisp, prompting him to place his jacket around her shoulders in a gesture that felt both gallant and possessive. Victoria and I were engaged for 6 months, he said without preamble, leaning against the railing. A merger of families more than hearts, if I'm being honest. She ended it when I refused to make her father chairman of Blackwood's board. I see, Sophia said, pulling his jacket closer against the chill. I tell you this not to garner sympathy, but because I want complete transparency between us. Alexander turned to face her. No hidden agendas, no unspoken expectations. The irony of his words wasn't lost on Sophia. Her entire presence in his life was built on an omission, one that grew more significant with each passing hour. I should tell you something, she began, the words sticking in her throat. Alexander's phone rang, the screen illuminating with James and a photograph of his brother. He silenced it without answering. James has terrible timing, he remarked dryly. Always has. You were saying? The moment had passed. Sophia shook her head. It's nothing important. Alexander studied her face, clearly not believing her but choosing not to press. I've been thinking about your first collection for Kronos. What if we launched with your moon phase design, the one from your portfolio? The abrupt change of subject caught Sophia off guard. That would be ambitious for an initial release. Ambitious is precisely what Kronos needs. Alexander's eyes lit with genuine enthusiasm. A statement piece that announces our return to haute horlogerie rather than mass luxury. Your design has that perfect balance of innovation and classical elements. Despite her internal turmoil, Sophia couldn't help but be drawn in by his vision. They spent the next half hour discussing technical specifications, materials, and production timelines, the conversation flowing naturally between them. Alexander's business acumen complemented her artistic sensibility in a way that felt almost magical. "You've already signed the contract in your mind, haven't you?" Alexander observed with a knowing smile. Sophia hesitated, then nodded. "The opportunity is too perfect to refuse. Then why do I sense reservation?" His gaze was penetrating, seeing more than she wanted to reveal. "Geneva holds complicated memories for me," she admitted carefully. "The past often does." Alexander stepped closer, his proximity sending an unwelcome thrill through her. "But we're offering you a future, Sophia, one worthy of your talents." His hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, the gesture intimate yet restrained. The air between them seemed to crackle with potential, professional, personal, something undefined yet powerful. "Mr. Blackwood?" An assistant appeared at the terrace door. "Your brother is on the line. He says it's urgent." Alexander sighed, his hand dropping away. "Tell him I'll call back in 5 minutes. He was quite insistent, sir. Something about the Geneva office and urgent documents requiring your signature." "Fine." Alexander turned to Sophia apologetically. "Business never sleeps, especially across time zones. Will you excuse me?" Sophia nodded, oddly relieved for the interruption. As Alexander strode away, phone already at his ear, she took a deep breath of the night air, trying to clear her head. In less than 48 hours, Alexander Blackwood had offered her everything she'd lost: professional respect, creative opportunity, financial security. His interest in her went beyond the professional. That much was clear from the nearly missed moment they'd just shared. And yet, as his voice drifted from inside, the familiar cadence of his conversation with James reaching her, even without distinguishable words, Sophia felt the walls of her carefully constructed new reality beginning to crack. Geneva, Kronos, James. The past and present were colliding in ways she couldn't have anticipated, drawing her into a web of connections and secrets that threatened everything this unexpected second chance promised. The photograph in her bag seemed to burn through the fabric, a tangible reminder of what awaited in Geneva, and what Alexander still didn't know. Dawn was breaking when Sophia finally returned to her apartment, the borrowed finery of the evening a stark contrast to her surroundings. She kicked off the designer heels, carefully hung the gown in its garment bag, and sank onto her worn couch, still wearing Alexander's jacket around her shoulders. Its subtle cologne lingered on the fabric, a sensory reminder of the man who had, in the span of 3 days, completely upended her carefully constructed life. Sleep eluded her despite her exhaustion. After tossing restlessly for an hour, she gave up and moved to her workbench, the one possession she'd refused to sell even in her most desperate months. The reassuring weight of her tools in her hands always brought clarity. She opened her worn leather case and removed Alexander's grandmother's watch, which she'd finished repairing. The delicate timepiece ticked steadily, its rhythm soothing to her overwrought nerves. Next to it, she placed the Kronos contract, its pages crisp and official. 2 paths, both leading to Alexander Blackwood, one to his past, one to his future. With a sigh, Sophia reached for her work bag and removed the photograph she'd been hiding. She hadn't looked at it in nearly a year, yet every detail remained etched in her memory. The image showed a younger Sophia standing on a Geneva lakefront, laughing as a man with his arm around her waist pressed a kiss to her temple. James Blackwood, with his charismatic smile and carefree demeanor, looking at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. They'd met at a horological conference where she'd presented a paper on traditional finishing techniques. James had approached her afterward, full of questions that revealed a genuine passion for watchmaking. Not the technical aspects that fascinated his brother, but the artistry, the heritage, the stories behind great timepieces. Their connection had been immediate and intense. 3 months of whirlwind romance followed. Dinners, weekend trips to Paris and Milan, long walks along Lake Geneva discussing everything from art to philosophy. James had introduced her to a world of privilege she'd only glimpsed before, yet he'd valued her expertise, her craftsmanship, her mind, or so she'd believed. Sophia's fingers traced the edge of the photograph. The camera had captured her radiant happiness but couldn't show what waited just around the corner. The betrayal, the humiliation, the heartbreak that had sent her fleeing from Geneva with nothing but debts and broken dreams. "Never again," she whispered to the empty room. Yet here she was, contemplating a return to the very city where everything had fallen apart, to work for the very company partially controlled by the man who had shattered her trust. Because of his brother, because of Alexander, so different from James in every way that mattered. Where James was charismatic charm and impulsive passion, Alexander was measured intensity and thoughtful strategy. Where James had seen her talent as an amusing novelty, Alexander recognized its true value. Sophia returned the photograph to her bag. The past was immutable, but the future remained unwritten. Taking a deep breath, she reached for a pen and signed the Kronos contract. She would return to Geneva. She would revitalize Kronos, and she would face James Blackwood on her own terms, as a professional equal, not a naive girl blinded by infatuation. First, however, she would have to tell Alexander the truth. "Sophia, come in." Alexander rose from behind his desk as his assistant showed her into his office at Blackwood Enterprises. The space reflected its occupant, impeccably organized, elegant without ostentation, commanding without trying to be. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city 40 floors below, reminding visitors of exactly where they stood in the world. Art and artifacts were displayed with the same thoughtful curation she'd noticed in his home, including a glass case holding several rare pocket watches. "Thank you for coming downtown," Alexander said, gesturing to a seating area with comfortable leather chairs. "I know it's short notice." "It's fine. I wanted to deliver this in person." Sophia handed him the signed contract. "And return this." She held out his jacket, neatly folded. Alexander accepted both, his fingers briefly touching hers in a contact that sent unexpected warmth through her. "You're keeping the dress, I hope." Clara was quite insistent that it was part of the package. "Clara has excellent judgment." Alexander set his jacket aside and looked at the signed contract. A genuine smile spread across his face. "So it's official. Welcome to Blackwood, Sophia." "Thank you for the opportunity." She hesitated. "However, there's something I need to discuss with you before we proceed further." Alexander's assistant appeared at the door before she could continue. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Blackwood, but the Tokyo call is starting in 3 minutes." Alexander frowned slightly. "We'll need to continue this later. The board is expecting updates on several acquisitions, including Kronos." He gestured to a side door. "Use my private elevator. My driver will take you anywhere you need to go." "Actually," Sophia said, "I'd like to visit the Blackwood workshop here, if that's possible, to get a sense of your current horological operations." "Of course." Alexander looked pleased by her initiative. "I'll have my assistant arrange it. Dinner tonight? We can continue our conversation then." Sophia nodded, uncomfortably aware that each postponement made her confession more difficult. As she turned to leave, Alexander caught her hand. "Sophia." His voice was lower, more intimate than his professional tone. "I'm glad you're joining us." The simple sincerity in his words caught her off guard. This wasn't the calculated charm James had wielded so effortlessly, but something more genuine, and therefore more dangerous to her carefully guarded heart. "I'll see you tonight," she managed, gently withdrawing her hand. The Blackwood workshop occupied the entire 38th floor, a state-of-the-art facility where master craftsmen worked on limited edition timepieces bearing the Blackwood name. Unlike Chronos, which produced watches at various price points, Blackwood timepieces were ultra-luxury items produced in extremely limited quantities for select clients. Howard Chen, the head watchmaker, gave Sophia a comprehensive tour. His initial reserve melted when she asked detailed technical questions that revealed her expertise. "Mr. Blackwood mentioned you trained in Geneva," Howard remarked as they observed a craftsman applying perlage to a movement plate. "With François Joubert?" "For 2 years," Sophia confirmed. "His approach to traditional finishing techniques formed the foundation of my work." Howard nodded appreciatively. "I studied under him as well, though some years earlier. His standards were exacting." "Borderline tyrannical," Sophia agreed with a smile, "but I've never met anyone with a better eye for detail." Their shared experience created an immediate rapport. As they continued through the workshop, Howard explained the Blackwood approach to watchmaking. "Alexander insists on absolute precision and innovation, but never at the expense of tradition," he explained. "Each Blackwood timepiece must advance the craft while honoring its heritage." "And Chronos?" Sophia asked. Howard's expression grew more measured. "Chronos has different oversight." "You mean James?" Sophia said, the name feeling strange on her lips after so long. Howard looked surprised. "Yes, James Blackwood oversees Chronos directly. He has a more commercial vision." "Meaning?" "Meaning he prioritizes aesthetic trends and market appeal over horological significance." Howard adjusted his glasses. The brothers often disagree on this philosophy. Alexander believes true luxury requires substance beneath style. "And James believes style is substance," Sophia murmured, remembering all too well James's approach to life, the dazzling surface that masked a hollow core. Howard gave her a curious look but continued with the tour. By its conclusion, Sophia had a much clearer understanding of how Chronos would fit within the Blackwood portfolio, and the challenges she would face working under James while reporting to Alexander. The potential for disaster seemed even greater than she'd initially feared. Alexander's driver was waiting when she finished at the workshop. "Mr. Blackwood suggested I take you shopping for essentials. You'll be leaving for Geneva in 3 days." "3 days?" Sophia repeated, stunned by the accelerated timeline. "Yes, miss. Mr. Blackwood is arranging everything. He said you'd want to get settled before the Chronos team meeting next week." The rapid pace left her dizzy. 3 days to pack up her life, prepare for her new role, and most importantly, tell Alexander the truth about her history with his brother. Rather than shopping, Sophia directed the driver to her apartment building. She needed time to think, to plan her approach for dinner with Alexander. Inside her apartment, she moved methodically, sorting her meager possessions into categories: keep, store, discard. Most of her belongings fell into the latter category, remnants of a life she was eager to leave behind. What couldn't be left behind was the truth. Tonight, she would tell Alexander everything, regardless of how it might affect her new position. Beginning this relationship, professional or otherwise, with a lie of omission would poison any chance of success. As Sophia carefully packed her tools, a text message arrived from Alexander. "Car will pick you up at 7. Wear the blue dress again. A." The casual command might have irritated her from anyone else, but from Alexander it felt like anticipation rather than presumption. He'd noticed how the dress had made her feel: confident, elegant, herself. At precisely 7 how, the Bentley arrived. This time Alexander was waiting inside, looking devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean physique. "I hope you don't mind," he said, as she slid into the seat beside him. "I finished earlier than expected and thought we could enjoy the drive together." In the intimate confines of the car, Sophia was acutely aware of his presence, the subtle cologne, the intensity that seemed to radiate from him even in repose. She'd rehearsed her confession a dozen times throughout the afternoon, but now the words stuck in her throat. "You've had a productive day," Alexander observed. "Howard was impressed by your knowledge and vision for Kronos." "Howard is a master craftsman. His approval means a great deal." "He rarely offers it," Alexander said with a hint of pride. "You've been making excellent impressions all around, Sophia." "About that?" She took a deep breath. "Alexander, there's something I need to tell you before we go any further." His phone rang. An exclusive ringtone she'd already learned indicated his brother calling. Alexander glanced at the screen and silenced it. "James can wait," he said firmly. "You were saying?" The moment stretched between them, pregnant with possibility and danger. Sophia opened her mouth to continue when Alexander's phone chimed with a text message. His expression darkened as he read it. "I apologize, Sophia, but we need to make a stop before dinner. An urgent matter requires my attention." The car changed direction, heading toward the financial district. Sophia felt the moment slipping away, yet couldn't find the courage to force the issue with Alexander, clearly preoccupied by whatever message he'd received. They pulled up outside the Blackwood building, its lobby still illuminated despite the late hour. "This won't take long," Alexander assured her as the driver opened her door. "There's something I need to sign immediately for our Geneva office." The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent, tension replacing the earlier warmth between them. When the doors opened, Alexander strode purposefully toward his office, Sophia following a few paces behind. His assistant's desk was empty, but light spilled from Alexander's open office door. As they approached, a male voice drifted into the hallway. "Alex, this is ridiculous. You can't possibly expect me to—" Sophia froze, the voice stopping her heart mid-beat. She knew that voice, had once loved the sound of it whispering in her ear. It had been 3 years, but she would recognize it anywhere. James Blackwood was in Alexander's office. Alexander had already reached the doorway. "James, you're supposed to be in Geneva." "Obviously," came the sardonic reply. "Yet here I am, summoned like a schoolboy to the headmaster's office because you've unilaterally decided to restructure my division." "Our division," Alexander corrected. "And I didn't summon you. I merely informed you of changes that the board has already approved. Changes that undermine my authority. Bringing in an outside creative director without my input?" Alexander stepped fully into the office. "Speaking of whom?" Sophia remained frozen in the hallway, every instinct screaming at her to flee. But it was too late. Alexander had turned back, extending his hand toward her. "Sophia, come meet your new colleague." With leaden feet, she forced herself forward, stepping into the office and into the shocked gaze of James Blackwood. Time seemed to stop as recognition dawned on his face. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally a complex mixture of emotions she couldn't begin to untangle. "Sophia?" James whispered, his voice stripped of its earlier confidence. Alexander looked between them, his quick mind clearly processing the unexpected familiarity. "You two know each other?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. Before either could respond, his gaze fell to Sophia's work bag, which had fallen open when she stopped abruptly. The corner of the photograph was visible, James with his arm around Sophia, their happiness frozen in time. Alexander's expression hardened as he reached down and removed the photograph, his eyes taking in every detail of his brother and Sophia together. The silence that filled the office was deafening. Alexander's fingers tightened around the photograph, creasing its edge. His eyes moved from the image to Sophia's face, then to his brother's, searching for confirmation of what was now painfully obvious. "You were engaged." It wasn't a question but a statement, delivered with the quiet precision that made Alexander so formidable in boardrooms. "No," Sophia said quickly. At the exact moment James said, "Yes." The contradiction hung in the air between them. "Interesting," Alexander said, his voice dangerously calm. He placed the photograph on his desk with deliberate care. Perhaps one of you would like to clarify." James recovered first, his initial shock giving way to the easy charm that had always been his strongest weapon. "It was 3 years ago, Alex. A brief engagement that ended... well, obviously it ended." He flashed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Small world, isn't it?" "Microscopic," Alexander replied, his gaze fixed on Sophia. "And yet somehow this connection never came up in our discussions about Kronos, a remarkable oversight." Sophia felt her professional dreams crumbling under the weight of his controlled anger. "I tried to tell you tonight," she said softly. "Several times, actually." "How convenient that the revelation arrives simultaneous with my brother." Alexander's tone was arctic. "Were you planning to mention it before or after relocating to Geneva to work directly under your former fiancé?" "We were never formally engaged," Sophia insisted, finding her voice, "and I was going to tell you everything tonight." James moved closer, his cologne, still the same after all these years, bringing unwelcome memories flooding back. "Alex, don't blame Sophia. She couldn't have known I'd be here tonight. I was supposed to be in Geneva until next week." Alexander ignored him, his focus unwavering from Sophia. 3 days. We've spent 3 days discussing your career, your talent, your future with my company. Yet somehow your history with my brother never seemed relevant?" The controlled hurt beneath his anger made Sophia's chest ache. "It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." Alexander cut her off. "A deliberate omission. The question is why?" His eyes hardened. "Was this position your idea or my brother's?" "What?" Sophia blinked in confusion. "Alex," James interjected, "you can't possibly think that you orchestrated this." Alexander finally turned to his brother. "That you identified a watchmaker of exceptional talent who also happened to be someone you once claimed to love and maneuvered me into hiring her? It wouldn't be your first attempt at corporate sabotage." James's easy demeanor slipped, revealing a flash of the calculated ambition beneath. "Paranoia doesn't suit you, brother. I had no idea you were considering Sophia for Kronos until I received your email yesterday." "A coincidence, then," Alexander said, clearly not believing it. "You'll forgive my skepticism. I've had 3 decades of experience with your coincidences." Sophia looked between the brothers, glimpsing a history of conflict far deeper than professional disagreement. "This isn't James's doing," she said firmly. "I never expected to see him again, let alone work with him." Alexander's piercing gaze returned to her. "Then explain the photograph. Why carry it if the relationship meant nothing?" "I didn't say it meant nothing," Sophia replied, her voice quiet but steady. "I said we weren't engaged." "Semantics," James interrupted with a dismissive wave. "We were practically engaged. We lived together, for God's sake." Sophia's head snapped toward him. "For 2 weeks, James. 2 weeks when my apartment flooded, not the domestic partnership you're implying." A muscle twitched in Alexander's jaw. "I don't need the details of your cohabitation. What I need is honesty, which has been notably absent." "Then let me be honest now," Sophia said, squaring her shoulders. "Yes, James and I were involved 3 years ago in Geneva. It ended badly. I left Switzerland and rebuilt my life here. When you approached me about Kronos, I should have told you immediately about my history with your brother. I didn't, and that was wrong." Alexander's expression remained unreadable. "Why didn't you?" The simple question required a complex answer, one that involved pride, shame, and the very real fear of losing the opportunity of a lifetime. "Because I didn't want my past to destroy my future," she admitted. "Because I've worked too hard to be defined by a relationship that failed. And because you knew I wouldn't hire you if I knew the truth," Alexander added coldly. "Would you have?" Sophia challenged. A tense silence followed her question. James broke it with a theatrical sigh. "This is absurd. Alex, whatever happened between Sophia and me was years ago. It has no bearing on her qualifications for Kronos. Everything has bearing, Alexander replied without looking at his brother. Nothing exists in isolation. He picked up the photograph again, studying it. Especially not this. Alexander, Sophia began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. I need to consider the implications for Kronos. His tone had shifted from personal to professional, a retreat to safer ground. James, we'll continue our discussion about the restructuring tomorrow. 9 a.m. my office. But 9 a.m., Alexander repeated with finality. He turned to Sophia. As for your position, I'll need to consult with the board before proceeding further. The clinical dismissal hurt worse than anger would have. I understand, Sophia said, her voice barely audible. My driver will take you home. Alexander reached for his phone, already moving on, already shutting her out. Alex, James tried once more. You're overreacting. Sophia is the best person for Kronos, regardless of our past. Your opinion on this matter is neither required nor welcome, Alexander replied without looking up. Good night, James. Recognizing dismissal, James nodded stiffly. Fine, we'll talk tomorrow. He turned to Sophia, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. It was unexpected to see you again, Sophia. She said nothing, unwilling to engage with him in front of Alexander. James hesitated a moment longer before departing, leaving Sophia alone with Alexander's cold silence. I'll go, she said quietly, when it became clear he had nothing more to say. Alexander finally looked up, his expression carefully composed. The driver is waiting downstairs. He paused. The contract has not been processed yet. Consider it on hold. The words fell like stones. All her hopes for Kronos, for returning to work she loved, for financial stability, for professional redemption, suspended in a single sentence. Alexander, she tried one last time. What happened with James has nothing to do with my capabilities as a watchmaker. This isn't about your capabilities, he replied, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. It's about trust. You had multiple opportunities to be forthcoming, and you chose concealment. The accusation stung because it was true. I was afraid. Of what? That I wouldn't hire you because you dated my brother? Or that I would discover the real reason your relationship ended? Sophia stiffened. What do you mean? Alexander's gaze was penetrating. James doesn't casually date accomplished women in his professional sphere, Sophia. He cultivates them for specific purposes. I wonder what purpose you served. The insight was so close to the painful truth that Sophia couldn't maintain eye contact. You should ask your brother about that. I intend to. Alexander turned away, a clear dismissal. Good night, Sophia. The Bentley ride home passed in a blur of city lights and silent recrimination. Sophia replayed the disastrous evening in her mind, analyzing each moment when she could have, should have, told Alexander the truth. Once home, she moved mechanically through her small apartment, removing the blue dress that now felt like a costume in a play where she'd forgotten her lines. She hung it carefully, knowing she would likely never wear it again. Sleep eluded her. At 3 a.m., she gave up trying and moved to her workbench, seeking comfort in the familiar. Her fingers found Alexander's grandmother's watch, its steady tick a reproach to her own unstable situation. How had everything unraveled so quickly? 3 days ago, she'd been fixing watches on a street corner. Now she'd been offered, and likely lost, the opportunity of a lifetime because of a past she couldn't escape. Dawn was breaking when her phone chimed with a text message. Her heart leapt, hoping for Alexander, but the number was unfamiliar. We need to talk. Coffee at Mercer's, 8 a.m. James. Sophia stared at the message, anger and bitter memories rising like bile. James Blackwood wanted to talk now after 3 years of silence, after she'd walked in on him with another woman, a key investor he'd been cultivating while simultaneously building their relationship. Sophia had never told anyone the full truth about their breakup, how James had used her to access her horological connections, particularly François Joubert, whose private client list included some of the wealthiest collectors in Europe, how he'd leveraged their relationship to arrange meetings that would have been impossible otherwise, how she'd discovered that their entire romance had been a calculated business strategy. She started to delete the message, then stopped. Maybe talking to James was exactly what she needed to do, not for his sake, but for her own, and for Alexander, who deserved to understand what kind of man his brother truly was. She texted back a single word: "Fine." Mercer's was a small cafe near the financial district, upscale enough for business meetings but casual enough for plausible deniability. James was already there when Sophia arrived, occupying a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He stood when he saw her, a ghost of his usual confident smile flickering across his face. "Sophia, thank you for coming." She took the seat across from him without returning the greeting, noting that he'd remembered how she took her coffee: black, no sugar. It was the kind of detail James excelled at recalling, part of his carefully cultivated charm. "You look good," he offered after an awkward silence. "The years have been kind." "Cut the pleasantries, James," Sophia said tiredly. "What do you want?" He leaned back, studying her with the appraising gaze she now recognized as calculation rather than admiration. "Direct as ever. It's refreshing, actually, after years of corporate politics." "I'm not interested in your commentary on corporate culture. Say what you need to say so we can both move on." James's facade slipped slightly, revealing genuine tension beneath. "Alexander is serious about rescinding your offer." "I'm aware." "He shouldn't be. You're exactly what Kronos needs right now." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you care about what Kronos needs? Last I checked, you were busy diluting the brand into mainstream irrelevance." A flash of irritation crossed his face. "That's unfair. I've been working within market realities." "You've been working to maximize short-term profit at the expense of horological integrity," Sophia countered. "Which is exactly why Alexander wanted to bring me in, to undo your damage." James leaned forward. "That's precisely my point. Alexander and I have different visions for Kronos, but we both recognize that the brand needs revitalization. Your designs, your craftsmanship, they're exactly what's required. So why am I here, James? To hear you advocate for my position after you helped destroy it with your little bombshell last night? I didn't know you'd be there," he protested. "That wasn't planned." "But you knew I was being considered for the position," Sophia said. "Alexander mentioned the email." James had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Yes, I knew. I was surprised when I saw your name." "And you said nothing. You let me walk into that ambush." What was I supposed to say? "By the way, Alex, that watchmaker you're hiring, we used to sleep together. That would have gone over well." Sophia's hand tightened around her coffee cup. "You could have warned me, at least." "I didn't have your contact information anymore," James said. "You disappeared quite thoroughly 3 years ago. After finding you with Elise Dupont," Sophia reminded him coolly. "I didn't realize a proper goodbye was expected in those circumstances." James winced. "That was regrettable." "Regrettable?" Sophia repeated, incredulous. "Is that what you call using me to access François' client connections while simultaneously sleeping with a potential investor?" "It wasn't like that," James began, then stopped at her expression. "Fine. It was exactly like that. Business and pleasure have always been intertwined for me. You knew who I was." "I thought I knew who you were," Sophia corrected. "I was wrong." James studied her for a long moment. "For what it's worth, I did care for you. More than most." The pathetic attempt at an apology only fueled her anger. "Is this supposed to make me feel better? Because it doesn't." She started to rise. "I have nothing more to say to you." "Wait," James said. urgency in his voice. "This isn't about us. It's about your position at Kronos. I've been trying to tell you. I support your appointment. Completely." Sophia paused, suspicious. "Why?" "Because despite our personal history, you're the right person for the job." He leaned forward. "Alexander is making this about me, but it should be about Kronos, about the work." "That's unexpectedly professional of you." James smiled ruefully. "I'm capable of professional behavior, contrary to your experience." He hesitated. "I'm meeting with Alexander in an hour. Let me advocate for you. Convince him to honor the contract." Sophia sat back down slowly. "And what do you get out of this?" The question seemed to surprise him. "The best creative director for Kronos." "Try again," Sophia said flatly. "You never do anything without personal benefit, James." He sighed, mask slipping to reveal the shrewd businessman beneath. "Fine. Alexander's restructuring plan limits my autonomy at Kronos. Having you there, someone with connection to both of us, could help maintain my influence." "And there it is," Sophia said, unsurprised. "You want to use me. Again." "I want to work with you," James corrected. "There's a difference. You'd have creative control, I'd maintain strategic input, and Kronos would benefit from both." "And Alexander?" "Gets the revitalized brand he wants." James leaned back. "Everyone wins." Sophia studied him, seeing clearly the manipulator she'd been blind to 3 years ago. "Except Alexander doesn't know the whole story about us, does he? About why we really ended." James's expression hardened slightly. "Ancient history isn't relevant to current business decisions." "Isn't it?" Sophia stood, gathering her bag. "Tell Alexander whatever you want, James. But know this. If I get this position, it will be on my terms, not yours. I won't be your connection or your influence. I'll report directly to Alexander, as the contract stipulates." "That's not realistic given the Geneva operations." "Those are my terms," Sophia interrupted. "Take them or leave them." She left without waiting for his response, stepping into the morning sunlight with a strange sense of liberation. For 3 years, James Blackwood had been the specter of failure and betrayal in her life. Now he was just a man, calculating, selfish, but ultimately not worth the power she'd given him over her future. The question remaining was whether Alexander would see past his brother's manipulation and his own sense of betrayal to give her the second chance she desperately wanted, not just professionally, but personally. Because somewhere between fixing his grandfather's watch on a street corner and discovering the truth in his office, Sophia had begun to care for Alexander Blackwood in a way that terrified her more than any professional setback. Sophia spent the morning attempting to reach Alexander. Her calls went straight to voicemail, her texts unanswered. By noon, desperation drove her to Blackwood Enterprises, where his assistant politely but firmly informed her that Mr. Blackwood was in meetings all day and not accepting visitors. "He's with his brother now," the young woman added, her expression carefully neutral. "Their meetings tend to run long." The diplomatic understatement spoke volumes. Sophia thanked her and turned to leave, unsure where to go or what to do next. Her entire future hung in the balance of a conversation she couldn't access. "Miss Moore?" Sophia turned to find Howard Chen approaching, his expression friendly but curious. "Howard," she acknowledged with a tired smile. "I was just leaving." "I heard about what happened," he said quietly. "Office news travels fast." Sophia winced. "How much do you know?" "Enough." Howard glanced around the reception area. "Perhaps we could get coffee? I'm due for a break anyway." 10 minutes later, they were seated in a small cafe across the street from Blackwood Tower. Howard stirred his tea methodically, organizing his thoughts before speaking. "The Blackwood brothers have a complicated relationship," he began. "Their rivalry began long before I joined the company, but I've witnessed enough to understand its depth." Alexander mentioned differences in business philosophy, Sophia said cautiously. Howard nodded. That's part of it. Alexander builds legacy, James builds opportunity, but it goes deeper than corporate strategy. He took a sip of his tea. Their father fostered competition between them from childhood. Academic achievements, sports, even social connections, everything was a battlefield. That sounds traumatic, Sophia observed. Indeed. When their father died 10 years ago, many hoped the rivalry would die with him. Howard's expression grew somber. Instead, it merely shifted to the boardroom. Alexander assumed leadership as the elder son, but James has never fully accepted his authority. And where does Kronos fit into this dynamic? Kronos was James's acquisition, his attempt to build a division under his complete control. But the company has struggled under his leadership. Howard paused. Alexander's decision to restructure, particularly bringing you in as creative director, is effectively a vote of no confidence in his brother's vision. The realization hit Sophia like a physical blow. So I was a pawn in their power struggle before I even entered the picture. Not a pawn, Howard corrected. A catalyst. Alexander genuinely values your talent, but your appointment was also a strategic move to wrest creative control from James. And now he's discovered I have history with James. Sophia rubbed her temples. It must seem like collusion. Howard studied her carefully. Is it? No, Sophia said firmly. I had no idea James was involved with Kronos when Alexander approached me. Our relationship ended years ago, badly. I should have told Alexander immediately, but I was afraid of losing the opportunity. Alexander values honesty above all else, Howard said, his tone gentle but pointed. Even above talent. I'm realizing that. Sophia stared into her untouched coffee. I've made a terrible mess of things. Howard's phone chimed with a message. He checked it, then looked up at Sophia with raised eyebrows. Well, it seems you have another chance to set things right. Alexander is asking for you in his office. Now. Alexander stood at the window of his office, back to the door, when Sophia entered. His reflection in the glass showed a man who hadn't slept, his usual immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. Thank you for coming, he said without turning. Thank you for seeing me, Sophia replied, trying to read his mood from the rigid set of his shoulders. Alexander finally turned, his expression carefully controlled. My meeting with James just concluded. I see. Sophia waited, unwilling to ask what had been decided. He advocated for your position, Alexander continued, watching her reaction closely. Quite passionately, in fact. I'm not surprised. Alexander's eyebrow raised slightly. You spoke with him this morning. It wasn't a question, but Sophia answered anyway. He contacted me. We met for coffee. And plotted your joint approach, Alexander concluded, a hint of bitterness in his tone. No, Sophia said firmly. I told him I had no interest in being his connection to you or Kronos. If I get this position, it will be on my own merit and answering directly to you, as the contract stipulates. Alexander's expression softened almost imperceptibly. That's not what James reported. I'm not surprised by that either. Sophia took a deep breath. James has always reshaped reality to suit his purposes. A family trait, perhaps, Alexander murmured, moving to his desk, though we express it differently. He gestured for her to sit, then settled into his own chair, his posture less defensive than it had been in their previous encounter. I owe you an apology, Sophia began before he could speak. I should have told you about James immediately. My omission was wrong, regardless of my reasons. Alexander studied her, his penetrating gaze searching for deception. Finding none, he nodded once. Why did your relationship with my brother end? The directness of the question caught Sophia off guard. That's complicated. I have time. Sophia gathered her thoughts, deciding that complete honesty was her only path forward. James and I met at a horological conference in Geneva. I was presenting a paper on traditional finishing techniques. He approached afterward, expressing interest in my work. We began dating. Alexander listened intently, his expression revealing nothing. I was flattered by his attention, Sophia continued. He was charming, enthusiastic about watches, or so I thought, and seemed genuinely interested in my career. What I didn't realize was that he was primarily interested in my professional connections. Specifically, François Joubert, my mentor. François maintains relationships with the wealthiest private collectors in Europe. Access to his circle is valuable. Understanding dawned in Alexander's eyes. And James wanted that access. Yes, he used our relationship to meet François and several key collectors. Meanwhile, he was also cultivating a relationship with Elise Dupont, a potential investor for a venture he was developing. Sophia's voice hardened at the memory. I discovered them together in our hotel room after a collector's dinner that James had skipped, claiming illness. Alexander winced slightly. James has always been strategic in his personal relationships. That's one word for it, Sophia said dryly. I left Geneva the next day, abandoned my apartment, my remaining courses at the institute, everything. I couldn't stay after the humiliation. And the financial strain of student loans brought you back here, Alexander finished, where you eventually lost your shop due to rent increases at a Blackwood property. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Life has a sense of humor, Sophia acknowledged. Alexander was quiet for a moment, absorbing her story. I believe you, he said finally. About James, about your intentions in taking the position. Relief washed through Sophia. Thank you. However, he continued, the situation presents complications for Kronos. I understand. If you need to rescind the offer— I'm not rescinding it, Alexander interrupted. Your talent is too valuable, and Kronos too important to the Blackwood portfolio. Hope flickered in Sophia's chest. Then, I'm modifying it. Alexander slid a document across the desk, a revised contract. You'll maintain the position of creative director, but you'll be based here for the first 3 months working with our design team. After that trial period, we'll reassess the Geneva relocation. Sophia skimmed the document. The compensation and creative control remained the same, only the location had changed. This is more than fair. I'm also implementing a new reporting structure, Alexander continued. You'll report directly to me, not to James. He'll maintain operational oversight of Kronos, but creative direction will be entirely under your authority. James won't like that, Sophia observed. James rarely likes my decisions, Alexander replied with grim humor. But as CEO, I don't require his approval. The subtle assertion of dominance wasn't lost on Sophia. This was Alexander reminding everyone, James, Sophia, perhaps even himself, who ultimately controlled Blackwood Enterprises. There's one more thing, Alexander added, his tone softening slightly. A personal condition. Sophia tensed. Which is? Complete transparency between us going forward. His eyes held hers. No omissions, no matter how uncomfortable. I need to know I can trust you, Sophia. The vulnerability beneath his professional demeanor touched something in Sophia. This wasn't just about business for Alexander, it was about rebuilding trust that had been damaged before it fully formed. You have my word, she said quietly. Alexander held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded, apparently satisfied. Then we have an agreement. He pushed a pen toward her. Welcome to Blackwood. Again. Sophia signed the revised contract, relief and gratitude washing through her. Thank you for the second chance. I won't disappoint you. See that you don't. The words were stern, but his expression had softened. I don't offer second chances often. As Sophia prepared to leave, Alexander spoke again. One more thing. I'll need you in Geneva next week for the formal introduction to the Kronos team. It will be a brief visit, 3 days, but necessary to establish your authority. But I thought, You'll be based here for 3 months, Alexander clarified. But the team needs to meet you, understand your vision. We'll travel together. The prospect of facing James on his territory with Alexander present sent a mixture of anxiety and determination through Sophia. I understand. Alexander stood, indicating their meeting was concluded. Howard will brief you on the Kronos portfolio tomorrow. My assistant will arrange your trip details. Sophia nodded, gathering her things. At the door, she paused. Alexander, thank you. Not just for the position, but for listening, for believing me. Something unreadable flickered in his eyes. Trust is earned, Sophia. You've begun to earn it back. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was a start. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Sophia spent hours at Blackwood, absorbing everything about Kronos, its history, current collections, market positioning, and manufacturing capabilities. Howard proved an invaluable guide, walking her through the complex web of suppliers, craftspeople, and distribution channels that made up the Kronos ecosystem. What became increasingly clear was how far the once prestigious brand had fallen under James's leadership. The quality remained decent, but the designs had grown derivative, chasing trends rather than setting them. The soul of the brand, its horological heritage, had been sacrificed for commercial appeal. It's fixable, Sophia told Alexander during their pre-trip briefing, but it will require significant changes to the current approach. They were in his office, surrounded by samples of current Kronos watches and Sophia's preliminary design concepts for the revitalization. How significant? Alexander asked, examining her sketches with evident approval. We need to return to first principles, Sophia explained. Focus on what made Kronos exceptional to begin with. Innovative complications expressed through clean, timeless design. James will resist, Alexander warned. He's invested heavily in the current direction. I know. Sophia met his gaze steadily. That's why I need your full support when we present to the team in Geneva. Alexander nodded, understanding the implicit request. You'll have it. A charged silence fell between them. Over the past days, they'd carefully maintained professional distance, their interactions focused entirely on Kronos. Yet Sophia couldn't help noticing the way Alexander's gaze sometimes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking, or how her own awareness of him had only intensified since their confrontation. Have you spoken to James since our meeting? She asked, breaking the silence. Briefly, Alexander replied. He's not pleased with the new reporting structure. I imagine not. Sophia hesitated. Will that be a problem in Geneva? Alexander's expression hardened slightly. James understands his position. He won't openly challenge my decision. The subtext was clear. The brothers' power struggle continued, with Sophia now firmly positioned in Alexander's camp. Our flight leaves at 7 a.m., Alexander said, changing the subject. My driver will pick you up at 5. I'll be ready. Sophia gathered her designs. Thank you again, Alexander, for everything. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. Sophia. Something in his tone made her turn back. Why did you keep the photograph? After everything James did? The question caught her off guard with its personal nature. The first non-professional inquiry he'd made since their reconciliation. Not for the reasons you might think, she answered carefully. It wasn't sentimentality or lingering attachment. Then what? Sophia considered her words. Reminder is perhaps the best description of what happens when I trust too easily, when I let my personal feelings cloud my professional judgment. Alexander absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. And yet here you are, trusting again. Yes, Sophia acknowledged, but with eyes wide open this time. Their gazes held for a moment longer than necessary, an unspoken current flowing between them. Acknowledgement of the complex situation they found themselves in, professionally entangled with personal undercurrents neither was ready to address. 5 a.m., Alexander finally said, breaking the moment. Rest well. Geneva will be challenging. As Sophia left Blackwood Tower, she reflected on the dramatic reversals of the past week. From street corner watchmaker to creative director, from avoiding James Blackwood to confronting him on his territory, from mistrusting Alexander to whatever complicated emotion now existed between them. Geneva awaited, with all its painful memories and professional opportunities, and so did the Blackwood brothers, one who had broken her heart, and one who, against all odds and her better judgment, was beginning to claim a piece of it. Sophia watched the familiar landscape of Geneva appear through the plane window, Lake Geneva shimmering under the morning sun, Mont Blanc rising majestically in the distance. 3 years ago, she'd fled this city with a broken heart and shattered dreams. Now she was returning as creative director of Kronos, accompanied by the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises. Yet the knot in her stomach tightened with each passing mile. "Second thoughts?" Alexander asked from the seat beside her, noticing her tension. "Not about the position," Sophia clarified. "Just memories." Alexander nodded, understanding in his eyes. Throughout the flight, he'd been attentive but professional, reviewing Kronos portfolios with her and outlining the schedule for their 3 days in Geneva. The careful distance he maintained was simultaneously a relief and a disappointment. "We'll be staying at La Réserve," he informed her as the plane began its descent. "The Kronos headquarters is 15 minutes away. We have a meeting with the executive team at 2 this afternoon." "And James?" Sophia asked the question she'd been avoiding. "Will be present," Alexander confirmed. "As operational director, his involvement is necessary, but the presentation of the creative vision is yours entirely." The plane touched down smoothly. As they disembarked into the private terminal, Sophia couldn't help but contrast this arrival with her last departure. Alone, heartbroken, on a budget flight with only a hastily packed suitcase. A sleek Mercedes awaited them, driver holding the door as they approached. Alexander gestured for Sophia to enter first, following her into the spacious back seat. As the car pulled away from the airport, he finally broke the professional facade he'd maintained since their departure. "Geneva suits you," he said, his voice softer than usual. "There's a different quality to your expression here. A recognition." Sophia glanced at him, surprised by the personal observation. "I was happy here once," she admitted. Before James," Alexander finished. His hand rested on the seat between them, close to hers but not touching. "I'm sorry for what my brother did to you." "You're not responsible for his actions." "No," Alexander agreed. "But I understand them all too well. James has always taken what he wants without consideration for the consequences." There was something in his tone, a complexity of emotion that suggested this pattern had affected Alexander personally, perhaps repeatedly, throughout their lives. "Did he ever take something from you?" Sophia asked, venturing into personal territory that had been implicit but unspoken between them. Alexander's expression closed briefly before he seemed to make a decision. "Many things, over many years. But that's the nature of our relationship. Competition rather than cooperation. I accepted it long ago." "That sounds lonely," Sophia observed. Alexander's eyes met hers, a flicker of surprise in them as if no one had ever suggested this interpretation before. "It is," he said simply. The car curved along the lakefront, passing landmarks that sent memories flooding back, the jet d'eau shooting water skyward, the old town with its cathedral spires, the flower clock blooming with seasonal colors. Sophia had loved this city once. Part of her still did. "We should have dinner by the lake tonight," Alexander suggested, following her gaze. "After the meeting, there's a small restaurant in Cologne with an excellent view." "I'd like that," Sophia replied, warmth spreading through her chest at the invitation that seemed more personal than professional. The car turned up a tree-lined drive, arriving at La Réserve, one of Geneva's most exclusive hotels, nestled in parkland along the lakeshore. As the staff efficiently handled their luggage, Alexander leaned closer to speak privately. "Take some time to settle in and prepare. We'll meet in the lobby at 1:30. His proximity sent a flutter through Sophia's stomach that had nothing to do with the impending meeting. "I'll be ready." Kronos headquarters occupied a historic building in Geneva's business district, its classical facade belying the modern offices within. As their car approached, Sophia noted the subtle Kronos logo above the entrance, a stylized hourglass intertwined with a C that she had always considered one of the brand's most elegant design elements. Inside, they were greeted by an assistant who escorted them to the top-floor conference room. Through glass walls, Sophia could see the Kronos executive team already assembled, 5 people seated around a polished table with James standing at the head, mid-conversation. He looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from authoritative to carefully neutral. "Alexander, Sophia, welcome to Geneva." His greeting was professional, giving nothing away to his team about their complicated history. Alexander nodded curtly, assuming command of the room with his mere presence. "Thank you for accommodating our schedule. I believe introductions are in order." James proceeded to introduce his team: Design Director Michel Renaud, Production Manager Claudia Schwartz, Marketing Director Philippe Dupont, Finance Director Robert Keller, and Head of Sales Luca Moretti. Each regarded Sophia with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "And this is Sophia Moore," Alexander stated once the introductions were complete, "the new creative director of Kronos." Michel, a thin man with fashionable glasses, stiffened visibly. "New creative director? I was under the impression we were discussing a consultant position." James cleared his throat. "There's been a slight misunderstanding, Michel. As I was about to explain before their arrival—" "There's no misunderstanding," Alexander interrupted firmly. "Ms. Moore has been appointed creative director with full authority over design direction, material selection, and quality standards. She'll be based in New York initially, but will oversee all creative processes remotely, with regular visits to Geneva." The tension in the room was palpable. Michel glanced between James and Alexander, clearly trying to navigate the brothers' power dynamic while processing his effective demotion. "Perhaps Ms. Moore could share her vision," Claudia suggested diplomatically. "So we understand the direction moving forward." Alexander nodded to Sophia, ceding the floor. This was the moment she'd prepared for, her opportunity to establish authority not through title but through expertise. Sophia opened her portfolio, distributing copies of her initial concepts. Kronos began as a brand defined by horological innovation expressed through elegant simplicity, she began. In recent years, that identity has become diluted, chasing market trends rather than setting them. Michel bristled, but remained silent as she continued. "My vision is to return Kronos to its foundations while moving boldly forward. Not retro designs that merely echo the past, but contemporary timepieces that honor horological tradition through modern expression." She walked them through her concept for the flagship piece, the women's moon phase watch Alexander had admired in her portfolio. As she explained the technical innovations and design philosophy behind it, she could see the team's initial resistance beginning to soften, all except Michel, who finally spoke up. "This is completely contrary to our current direction. We've invested millions in positioning Kronos as an accessible luxury brand. These complications would price us out of our established market segment." "Actually," Alexander interjected, "they would reposition us in a more profitable segment. The current strategy has resulted in declining margins and brand dilution." "With all due respect," Michel argued, "we've been following Director Blackwood's strategy." He nodded toward James. James's expression tightened. "Market conditions have changed. We need to adapt." Sophia recognized the move for what it was. James already distancing himself from the failing strategy he'd championed, preparing to align with the new direction while saving face. "Adaptation is precisely what I'm proposing," Sophia continued smoothly. "Not abandonment of the current product line, but evolution toward a more distinctive identity. We'll maintain certain accessible collections while developing new signature pieces that elevate the entire brand. By the end of her presentation, even Michelle had fallen reluctantly silent, unable to counter the comprehensive strategy she'd outlined. The others were nodding, particularly Claudia and Luca, who seemed to recognize the potential in her approach. "Thank you, Ms. Moore," James said, reasserting himself as the meeting concluded. "The team will need time to process these ideas and develop implementation plans." "Of course," Sophia agreed. "I'll be available for questions and discussions over the next 2 days." As the team filed out, Michelle lingering to speak quietly with James, Alexander placed a hand lightly on Sophia's back. "Well done," he murmured. "You've given them a vision they can't reasonably reject." "Michelle will try," Sophia observed. "Michelle has been James's proxy for years," Alexander replied. His resistance was expected. James approached them after the others had departed. "Impressive presentation, Sophia. You haven't lost your touch for persuasive argument." The subtle reminder of their past relationship didn't escape Alexander, whose hand tensed slightly against Sophia's back before dropping away. "The concept speaks for itself," he said coolly. James smiled, all charm and ease despite the underlying tension. "Indeed, I've always appreciated Sophia's creativity." His gaze lingered on her a moment too long. "Dinner tonight? We should discuss the transition in more detail." "Another time," Alexander replied before Sophia could respond. "We have plans this evening." Something flashed in James's eyes, a mixture of amusement and calculation. "Of course you do. Perhaps tomorrow then." He nodded to them both. "If you'll excuse me, I should speak with Michel. He's rather territorial about design." As James left, Sophia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That was typical James," Alexander finished, "creating personal undertones in professional settings." "He's testing boundaries," Sophia observed. "Yours as much as mine." Alexander's expression darkened. "A lifelong habit." He checked his watch. "We have a few hours before dinner. Would you like to rest at the hotel or—" "Actually," Sophia said, making a sudden decision, "I'd like to visit the Institute. It's not far from here." Alexander studied her face. "Are you sure? It might bring back difficult memories." "That's precisely why I need to go," Sophia explained. "To reclaim those memories, make peace with them. If I'm going to work with Kronos, I can't avoid my past in Geneva." Understanding dawned in Alexander's eyes. "I'll have the driver take us." The Geneva Institute of Horology stood unchanged, its limestone facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. Students moved purposefully through the courtyard, carrying the same leather cases Sophia had once used for her tools and projects. Alexander remained respectfully at her side as she walked the familiar paths, occasionally pausing to explain the significance of certain workshops or classrooms. He listened attentively, asking questions that revealed genuine interest rather than polite conversation. "This is where I spent most of my time," Sophia said, stopping outside the restoration workshop. Through the window she could see students bent over workbenches, manipulating tiny components with specialized tools. "Francois taught here." "Your mentor," Alexander recalled. "Yes." Sophia's voice softened with affection. "He changed my life, showed me what watchmaking could truly be." "Will you see him while we're here?" The question gave Sophia pause. She'd avoided contacting Francois after leaving, too ashamed of her abrupt departure, too hurt by James's exploitation of their connection. "I don't know if he'd want to see me," she admitted. "I think he would," said a familiar voice behind them. Sophia turned to find Marcus, her former instructor, smiling warmly at her. "I thought that was you. Francois will be delighted to know you've returned." "Marcus." Sophia embraced him, genuinely pleased despite the circumstances of their last meeting in New York. "I didn't expect to see you." "I still teach the advanced complication course," he explained. then extended his hand to Alexander. "Mr. Blackwood, we met briefly at your charity gala." "Of course," Alexander shook his hand. "You taught Sophia at the Institute." Marcus nodded, looking between them with undisguised curiosity. "And now she's working with you at Kronos, I understand. News travels quickly in horological circles." "We're revitalizing the brand," Alexander confirmed. "With Sophia's talent, I have no doubt you'll succeed." Marcus turned to her. "Francois is teaching today, but he finishes at 4. You should visit him. He often speaks of you, you know, his most brilliant student." Emotion welled in Sophia's throat. "I'd like that very much." As Marcus excused himself to return to class, Alexander touched Sophia's elbow gently. "We have time before dinner. I can wait if you'd like to see him alone." The consideration in his offer touched her deeply. "Thank you, but I'd like you to meet him. Francois understands watchmaking in a way few people do. I think you'd appreciate each other." Something warm flickered in Alexander's eyes. Pleasure at being included in this personal pilgrimage. "I'd be honored." As they walked toward Francois's workshop, Sophia felt a strange sense of worlds colliding, her past and present merging in unexpected ways. The pain of her memories in Geneva was still present, but now overlaid with something new, something hopeful. The city that had witnessed her greatest heartbreak was offering a second chance, professionally through Kronos, and perhaps personally through the man walking beside her, whose quiet strength and genuine respect had begun to heal wounds she'd thought permanent. Francois Joubert's workshop hadn't changed in 3 years. The same worn wooden workbenches, the same specialized tools arranged with mathematical precision, the same smell of metal, oil, and time. The master watchmaker himself looked exactly as Sophia remembered. Silver hair swept back from a high forehead, wire-rimmed spectacles perched on an aquiline nose, fingers permanently stained with the telltale marks of his craft. He was hunched over a disassembled pocket watch when they entered, so absorbed in his work that he didn't immediately notice their presence. Sophia paused in the doorway, suddenly overwhelmed by emotion. This man had shaped her not just as a watchmaker but as a person, instilling principles she carried into every aspect of her life. "Excuse the interruption," she said softly in French. Francois looked up, his eyes widening in recognition. For a moment he remained perfectly still, almost like one of his watch mechanisms paused between ticks. "Ma petite," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have returned." He rose with surprising agility for a man in his 70s and crossed the workshop in swift strides, embracing Sophia with the affection of a father. She returned the embrace, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm so sorry I left without saying goodbye," she whispered. Francois drew back, holding her at arm's length to study her face. "What matters is that you have returned." His eyes shifted to Alexander, who stood respectfully in the background. "And with interesting company, I see." "Francois Joubert, this is Alexander Blackwood," Sophia introduced. "Alexander, this is my mentor, Francois." "A great honor," Alexander said in fluent French, stepping forward to shake the watchmaker's hand. "Sophia speaks of you with immense respect." Francois's shrewd eyes assessed Alexander with the same precision he applied to complex movements. "The CEO of Blackwood Enterprises comes to my humble workshop. I am intrigued." "Alexander has acquired Kronos," Sophia explained. "I'm joining as creative director." Francois's bushy eyebrows shot up. "Kronos? Truly?" He turned to Alexander with newfound interest. "And you are restoring it to its former glory?" "That's our intention," Alexander confirmed, with Sophia's vision guiding the creative direction. Francois gestured toward 2 stools near his workbench. "Please, sit. This deserves proper discussion." As they settled, he peered at Sophia over his spectacles. "So you are returning to Geneva permanently?" "Not immediately," Sophia answered carefully. I'll be based in New York for the first 3 months, then we'll reassess. Francois nodded thoughtfully. Because of James Blackwood, I presume. Alexander's subtle tension at his brother's name didn't escape Sophia's notice. You know about that? She asked Francois. My dear, everyone in our small world knew. Francois shook his head disapprovingly. That young man caused quite a stir after your departure, looking for you everywhere, making dramatic declarations. When I refused to tell him where you'd gone, not that I knew, he threatened to withdraw Blackwood support from our annual exhibition. That sounds like James, Alexander said, his voice carefully controlled. Francois studied him with renewed interest. You are not like your brother. This is good. The blunt assessment delivered with a watchmaker's precision made Sophia suppress a smile. Few people make that observation within 5 minutes of meeting me, Alexander remarked, amusement glinting in his eyes. I have spent 70 years understanding the inner workings of complex mechanisms, Francois replied. Human or horological, the principles are not so different. He turned back to Sophia. You are making the right choice with Kronos. The brand has lost its soul under current management. That's exactly what I told Alexander. Sophia agreed. We need to return to first principles, innovative complications expressed through clean design. Francois beamed with obvious pride. You remember my teachings well. He rose and moved to a cabinet in the corner of the workshop. I have something to show you, both of you. He returned with a velvet-lined tray containing 3 pocket watches. The Evolution of Kronos, 1925, 1952, and 1978, before the decline. Alexander and Sophia leaned forward, examining the timepieces with shared appreciation. The earliest watch featured an elegant moon phase complication. The 1952 model showcased an innovative calendar system. The 1978 piece displayed a stunning chronograph with split-second capability. The technical innovation is remarkable, Alexander observed, but what strikes me most is the consistency of design language across 5 decades, different eras, same DNA. Francois nodded approvingly. Exactly. This is what Kronos lost, not technical capability, but identity. Each watch must be unmistakably Kronos without sacrificing evolution. That's precisely our approach for the revitalization, Sophia explained, sharing her concept for the women's moon phase watch that would serve as their flagship piece. Francois listened intently, occasionally interrupting with questions or suggestions that demonstrated his unparalleled understanding of horological mechanics. By the time she finished, his eyes were gleaming with excitement. This is extraordinary work, Sophia, worthy of Kronos at its finest. He turned to Alexander. You have chosen well, Monsieur Blackwood, not just for Kronos, but perhaps for yourself as well. The pointed personal observation created a moment of charged silence. Sophia felt heat rise to her cheeks as Alexander's gaze briefly met hers before returning to Francois. I consider myself fortunate that our paths crossed, Alexander replied carefully. Francois chuckled, clearly enjoying their discomfort. Fortune, fate, coincidence. Watchmakers know these are just different names for the same mechanism. He checked his own timepiece. But I have kept you too long, and you surely have plans for the evening. Dinner by the lake, Alexander confirmed, rising. But this has been invaluable. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and these remarkable pieces. Francois waved away the thanks. Come back tomorrow, both of you. I have more to show you. Prototype complications from Kronos' archives that never reached production. They might inspire your new direction. After promises to return, heartfelt embraces, and Francois extracting Sophia's solemn vow not to disappear again, they departed the Institute. Twilight was settling over Geneva, the lake beginning to reflect the city's emerging lights. He's extraordinary, Alexander remarked as they walked to the waiting car. Brilliant, perceptive. Meddling, Sophia added with a small smile. Francois has never believed in separating the personal from the professional. To him, Watchmaking is life, and life is watchmaking. A philosophy with merit, Alexander observed, holding the car door for her. The best work comes from those who invest themselves completely in their craft. As they settled into the back seat, Sophia felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. Returning to the institute, reconnecting with Francois, it had been healing rather than painful, a reclamation of part of herself she'd abandoned in her hasty departure. "Thank you for encouraging me to visit," she said as the car wound its way toward Cologne. "And for accompanying me. It means more than I can express." Alexander's hand found hers in the dimness of the back seat, his touch sending warmth cascading through her. "Thank you for sharing it with me. Francois is a remarkable man, and clearly important to you." Their hands remained connected for the duration of the drive, neither acknowledging the contact nor breaking it. Something was shifting between them, the careful, professional distance gradually giving way to something more personal, more profound. The restaurant Alexander had chosen was everything Sophia might have expected. Elegant without ostentation, intimate without being overbearing. Their table overlooked the lake, with lights from distant villages twinkling on the opposite shore, and Mont Blanc a shadowy presence in the fading twilight. "Do you know," Alexander said as they studied their menus, "I've been coming to Geneva for 20 years, and this is the first time I've dined here for pleasure rather than business." "I find that hard to believe," Sophia replied. "You seem to appreciate the finer things in life." "Appreciation and experience are different matters." Alexander set aside his menu, regarding her with sudden intensity. "I've spent most of my adult life building and maintaining Blackwood. There's been little time for other pursuits." "That sounds lonely," Sophia observed, echoing her earlier comment from the car. This time Alexander didn't deflect. "It has been at times. The price of responsibility, I suppose." "And success," Sophia added, "though surely you've had relationships despite your work." "A few. None that survived my schedule or my focus." A wry smile touched his lips. "Victoria claimed I was married to Blackwood long before I proposed to her. Was she right?" "Probably." Alexander's expression grew contemplative. "The company has been my life since I was 22, when my father's health began to fail. James was still in university then. The responsibility fell to me." "You never resented that?" "No." Alexander's response was immediate and sincere. "I loved the challenge, the building, the creating. What I resented was my father's insistence on making everything a competition between James and me, even as he was dying." Sophia sensed they were venturing into territory Alexander rarely discussed. "How so?" "He would compare our contributions, our ideas, our results, always pitting us against each other rather than encouraging collaboration." Alexander's fingers traced the stem of his wineglass. "His last words to me were, 'Keep James in check.' His last words to James were, 'Show your brother what you're capable of.' Even from his deathbed he was stoking conflict." "That's terrible," Sophia said softly. "For both of you. It shaped us, certainly." Alexander looked up, his gaze direct. "It's why James is the way he is. Always trying to prove himself, always looking for the advantage. He believes he's still competing with me for our father's approval, even now." Understanding dawned. "And you believe you're still responsible for keeping him in check?" "I know I am. James is brilliant, charming, creative, but without boundaries, he's destructive. To the company, to others." His eyes met hers. "To himself." The waiter's arrival interrupted their conversation. After they ordered, Sophia steered the discussion to lighter topics, their mutual appreciation for art, literature, travel destinations they'd both enjoyed. As the meal progressed, she found herself increasingly drawn to Alexander's thoughtful observations and subtle humor. He was nothing like his brother. Where James was all surface charm and calculated interest, Alexander's attraction lay in his depth, his genuine curiosity, his careful attention to her words. "May I ask you something personal?" Alexander said as they finished their main course. "Of course." "The photograph of you and James. You said you kept it as a reminder not to trust too easily. Yet here you are, trusting me with your professional future after knowing me less than 2 weeks." Sophia considered the observation. "That's true. But I think I've learned to distinguish between different kinds of trust. I trust your business acumen and your appreciation for craftsmanship. That's not the same as personal trust," Alexander finished. "The kind that James betrayed." "Yes." Sophia met his gaze steadily. "Though I'm beginning to trust you in that way too, against my better judgment." A charged silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. "Perhaps your judgment is better than you think," Alexander finally said, his voice lower, more intimate. Before Sophia could respond, a familiar voice cut through the moment. "Alexander! Sophia! What a wonderful coincidence!" James Blackwood approached their table, impeccably dressed and radiating the effortless charm that had once captivated Sophia. At his side was an elegant blonde woman whose practiced smile didn't reach her eyes. "James," Alexander acknowledged, his expression cooling instantly. "This is unexpected, isn't it?" James's smile suggested it was anything but. "Elise and I were just discussing the Kronos situation when I spotted you. You remember Elise Dupont, of course." Sophia felt as if the air had been pulled from her lungs. Elise Dupont, the woman she'd found with James 3 years ago, the investor he'd been cultivating while building their relationship. "Of course," Alexander replied smoothly, though his eyes had narrowed slightly. "Miss Dupont, it's been some time." "Too long," Elise agreed in a French accent. Her gaze slid to Sophia with calculated assessment. "And this must be the new creative director I've been hearing about. How interesting." The emphasis she placed on the final word made its implication clear. She remembered exactly who Sophia was and was enjoying the discomfort her presence created. "Sophia Moore," Alexander confirmed, his hand finding Sophia's under the table in a gesture of silent support. "Who is revolutionizing Kronos' approach to design and heritage?" "So James was telling me," Elise purred. "Such passion for the project, both of you. History repeating itself, perhaps?" The deliberate barb hung in the air. Sophia straightened in her chair, refusing to be intimidated. "Some history is worth repeating, Ms. Dupont. Kronos' legacy of horological excellence, for instance. Other aspects are best left in the past." Alexander's fingers tightened around hers, a silent acknowledgement of her composure. "We won't intrude on your dinner," James said smoothly, though his eyes gleamed with satisfaction at the disruption he'd caused. "I just wanted to confirm our meeting tomorrow morning at the Kronos workshop. 10 o'clock? "We'll be there," Alexander confirmed, his tone making it clear the conversation was concluded. With practiced smiles and insincere pleasantries, James and Elise departed, leaving an atmosphere of tension in their wake. "That was not a coincidence," Sophia said quietly once they were out of earshot. "No," Alexander agreed. "James rarely leaves things to chance, especially when he can orchestrate a moment of maximum discomfort." "Elise Dupont," Sophia murmured. "Of all people." Alexander's expression was grim. "She's still involved with Kronos as a minority investor. James must have specifically invited her this evening, knowing we'd be here. How would he know that? The reservation would have been made through my assistant, who coordinates with his assistant." Alexander's jaw tightened. "A simple inquiry from him would have revealed our plans." Sophia shook her head, feeling naive for being surprised by James's machinations. "He's trying to destabilize us, both professionally and personally," Alexander finished, his eyes meeting hers. "Yes, and he'll continue to do so as long as he perceives it as effective." The evening's easy intimacy had been disrupted exactly as James had intended. Yet Alexander's hand still held hers, his thumb now tracing small circles on her skin in a gesture that felt both soothing and electrically charged. "We shouldn't let him succeed," Sophia said quietly. Alexander studied her face in the candlelight. "No," he agreed, "we shouldn't." The rest of dinner passed in renewed conversation, both making a deliberate effort to reclaim the evening from James's intrusion. By the time they returned to La Réserve, walking along the moonlit lakeshore path to the hotel, the tension had dissipated, replaced by a deepening connection that was becoming increasingly difficult to define purely as professional. At Sophia's door, Alexander paused. "I apologize for my brother's behavior tonight." "You're not responsible for James," she reminded him gently. "Perhaps not, but I am responsible for bringing you into his orbit again." Alexander's gaze was intense, searching. "I won't let him hurt you a second time, Sophia." The simple promise, delivered with quiet determination, touched something deep within her. Without overthinking, Sophia rose on her toes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Thank you for today," she whispered, "for everything." For a breathless moment, they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, sense the subtle shift in his breathing. Alexander's hand came up to touch her face, his thumb gently tracing her cheekbone in a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "Good night, Sophia," he said softly, before stepping back with evident reluctance. "Tomorrow will be challenging. Rest well." As her door closed between them, Sophia leaned against it, her pulse racing and her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. In just over a week, Alexander Blackwood had become central to her life. Professionally, certainly, but increasingly in ways that transcended business. The question was whether she was brave enough to trust again, to risk her heart with a man whose last name had already broken it once before. Morning arrived with a meteorological metaphor for the day ahead, clear skies gradually yielding to gathering storm clouds over Lake Geneva. Sophia observed the changing weather from her hotel balcony, coffee in hand, mentally preparing for their visit to the Kronos workshop. A message from Alexander appeared on her phone. "Breakfast. Lobby in 30 minutes." The simple invitation brought a smile to her face. Despite James's calculated interruption the previous evening, something significant had shifted between her and Alexander. The careful professional boundaries were blurring, replaced by a connection that felt increasingly personal. Dangerous territory, she reminded herself, yet she couldn't deny the anticipation that fluttered in her chest as she dressed for the day. In the lobby, Alexander awaited her, reviewing documents on his tablet. He looked up as she approached, his expression warming in a way that made her pulse quicken. "Good morning," he greeted, rising to meet her. "Sleep well?" "Surprisingly, yes." Sophia studied his face, noting the subtle signs of tension around his eyes. "You didn't." Alexander's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Perceptive. I was up late reviewing Kronos's financial records. Something doesn't align with the production reports James submitted last quarter." "Discrepancies?" "Inconsistencies," Alexander clarified. "Nothing overtly suspicious, but enough to warrant closer examination." He gestured toward the hotel restaurant. "But that's a conversation for after breakfast. Shall we?" Over a spread of pastries, fruit, and excellent coffee, they strategized for the workshop visit. The Kronos facility housed both design studios and production areas where prototype pieces were handcrafted before being sent to larger manufacturing facilities for limited production runs. "James has positioned himself as the creative visionary to the craftspeople," Alexander explained. "He'll resist any perception that your appointment undermines that image. So I need to establish authority without directly challenging his position," Sophia concluded. "Exactly. The watchmakers will respect your technical expertise, but they're loyal to James. Tread carefully." "Will you be joining the tour?" Alexander shook his head. I have meetings with the financial team this morning. I'll join you for lunch, then we'll meet with Francois as planned. Something in his tone gave Sophia pause. You're investigating James, aren't you? The financial discrepancies. Alexander met her gaze steadily. Let's say I'm exercising appropriate oversight. James has always had a creative approach to corporate governance. The diplomatic phrasing made his concerns clear. Whatever Alexander had found in the financial records was serious enough to warrant personal investigation. Be careful, Sophia said quietly. James doesn't respond well to perceived threats. I'm well aware. Alexander checked his watch. The car will be here in 15 minutes. Ready to reclaim your place in the watchmaking world? His question, framed as a vote of confidence rather than inquiry, bolstered Sophia's resolve. More than ready. The Kronos workshop occupied a converted industrial building on the outskirts of Geneva, its modern glass and steel addition contrasting with the original stone structure. James awaited them in the reception area, immaculately dressed and wearing the charismatic smile that had once captivated Sophia. Welcome to the heart of Kronos, he greeted, extending a hand to Alexander. Though I'm afraid you'll have to postpone your tour, brother. The financial team is already waiting in the conference room. Urgent matters regarding the Paris boutique renovation. Alexander's expression betrayed nothing, though Sophia sensed his suspicion at the last-minute change of plans. Of course. Sophia, will you be all right continuing with James? Perfectly fine, she assured him, though unease prickled at the prospect of navigating the workshop alone with her former lover. Excellent, James said smoothly. I'll take good care of her, Alex. We have history after all. The calculated reminder hung in the air like a challenge. Alexander's jaw tightened briefly before he nodded, eyes meeting Sophia's in a silent message of caution. I'll see you both at lunch, he said, before following a waiting assistant toward the conference area. As soon as Alexander was out of sight, James's demeanor shifted subtly, his smile becoming more intimate, his posture more relaxed. Alone at last, he remarked. Feels like old times, doesn't it? Not remotely, Sophia replied coolly. Shall we focus on the workshop tour? James chuckled, seemingly amused by her professional tone. Always so direct. It's refreshing, actually. Come, let me show you what we've built here. The tour began in the design studio, where several designers worked at drafting tables and computer stations. Michel Renaud looked up as they entered, his expression tightening at the sight of Sophia. Michel, you remember Sophia Moore, our new creative director, James said with deliberate emphasis that underscored the hierarchy change. Of course, Michel replied stiffly. We were just discussing the implementation challenges of Ms. Moore's concepts. Challenges? Sophia inquired. The moon phase complication you've proposed requires manufacturing techniques beyond our current capabilities, Michel explained, a hint of satisfaction in his tone. The production costs would be prohibitive. Before Sophia could respond, James interjected. Actually, Michel, I've been meaning to discuss this. I've already spoken with our suppliers in the Vallée de Joux. They believe the complication is perfectly feasible within our budget parameters. Michel's expression registered surprise and confusion. Clearly, this was the first he'd heard of such conversations. Sophia studied James, trying to understand his angle. Yesterday, he'd seemed resistant to her vision. Today, he was supporting it against his own design director's objections. Perhaps Ms. Moore would like to explain her technical specifications directly to the team, Michel suggested, a last attempt to maintain his territorial claim. An excellent idea, Sophia agreed, seizing the opportunity. For the next hour, she walked the design team through her vision for Kronos, answering technical questions with the expertise that had once earned her recognition as one of the industry's most promising talents. By the time they moved on to the production area, even Michel's resistance had begun to soften in the face of her evident mastery. The workshop floor housed 20 master watchmakers, each at individual stations equipped with specialized tools and microscopes for the precision work of creating and assembling watch movements. Sophia felt immediately at home among the quiet concentration and familiar instruments. "Our craftspeople are the best in Switzerland," James said proudly. "Many trained at the Institute, like you?" As they moved through the space, Sophia stopped to observe the watchmaker's techniques, asking questions and offering observations that demonstrated her understanding of their craft. She could feel their initial wariness giving way to professional respect. "This is Anton, our head watchmaker." James introduced an older man with steady hands and keen eyes. "He's been with Kronos for 30 years. "An honor," Sophia said, genuinely impressed. "Your work on the split-second chronograph movement in the 1990s was revolutionary." Anton's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You know my work? François Joubert used your chronograph as a teaching example at the Institute. The column wheel design was elegantly efficient." A smile broke across Anton's weathered face. "François, now there's a name from the past. How is the old master?" "Still teaching, still creating, still terrifying students with his standards," Sophia replied with a smile. "You studied under him?" When Sophia nodded, Anton's demeanor warmed considerably. "Then you understand what we strive for here, despite recent directions." The subtle critique of Kronos's current strategy didn't escape James, whose smile tightened momentarily. "Sophia will be leading our return to more traditional horological values," he said smoothly. "In fact, perhaps you'd like to show her the Heritage Archive? I need to check on Alexander and the financial team." Anton nodded enthusiastically. "It would be my pleasure." As James excused himself, Sophia wondered about his apparent support of her vision and his sudden need to check on Alexander. The inconsistency heightened her sense that James was playing a more complex game than was immediately apparent. Anton led her through the workshop to a secure room at the back, the Heritage Archive, where Kronos kept historical pieces, prototype movements, and documentation spanning the company's century-long history. "Few people appreciate what we have here," Anton said as he unlocked the room. "Mr. James shows potential investors, but I don't think he truly understands the horological significance." Inside, glass cases displayed watches representing every era of Kronos's evolution. Anton guided her through the collection, sharing insights about particular innovations and the watchmakers who had created them. "This is what we should be honoring in the new collections," Sophia observed, examining a particularly elegant moon phase watch from 1938. "Exactly what I've been saying for years," Anton agreed, "but Mr. James has been focused on fashion trends and marketing perspectives." "That's changing now," Sophia assured him. As she moved to another display case, something caught her eye, a small photograph tucked into the corner of a frame containing design sketches. It showed a much younger François Joubert standing proudly beside a handsome man in his 40s, a man whose features bore a striking resemblance to both Alexander and James. "Is that Richard Blackwood?" she asked, pointing to the image. Anton nodded. Richard Blackwood and François were colleagues once, before Richard took over his family's investment firm. He remained a patron of fine watchmaking throughout his life. In fact, Kronos might not have survived the quartz crisis without Blackwood investment. I didn't realize the Blackwood connection to Kronos went back that far. Oh yes, Richard had a genuine passion for horology. His sons, though, Anton shrugged expressively. The elder one understands the craftsmanship but is more businessman than watchmaker. The younger one understands neither, in my opinion. The assessment aligned with Sophia's own observations. What surprised her was learning that the Blackwood family's connection to watchmaking, and to François, predated James and Alexander. "Did François never mention it?" Anton asked, noting her surprise. "No," Sophia said slowly. "He didn't." Before she could inquire further, the archive door opened to reveal James, his expression pleasant but his eyes sharp with calculation. "Enjoying the history lesson?" he asked lightly. Anton is a walking encyclopedia of Kronos lore. "It's fascinating," Sophia replied. "I didn't realize your father had such a personal connection to the brand." Something flickered in James's eyes, A momentary calculation. Yes, quite the coincidence that Alexander acquired his favorite watch company, isn't it? Almost as if he'd been planning it for years. There was an implication in his tone that Sophia couldn't quite decipher. Before she could question it, James continued, Alexander sends his apologies, but he's still tied up with the financial team. He's asked me to take you to lunch instead. James checked his watch. We're expected at Domaine de Châteauvieux in 30 minutes, shall we? The restaurant he named was one of Geneva's most exclusive, intimate, romantic, and definitely not the casual business lunch she'd anticipated with Alexander. The change in plans felt deliberate, another of James's manipulations. I should wait for Alexander, Sophia began. He specifically suggested I take you, James insisted. The financial issues are quite complex. He might be tied up for hours. Anton, sensing the undercurrents, discreetly excused himself, leaving Sophia alone with James in the archive. What are you doing, James? She asked directly once Anton had departed. Taking you to lunch, as requested by my brother. His innocent expression didn't reach his eyes. Unless you're uncomfortable being alone with me? I'm not uncomfortable, Sophia clarified. I'm suspicious of your motives. James laughed, the sound both genuine and calculated. Always so perceptive. Fine, cards on the table. I want to talk to you about Alexander. There are things you should know before you become more involved. The implication was clear. James had noticed the developing connection between her and Alexander. Anything you think I should know about Alexander, you can say in front of him, Sophia replied. Can I? James's expression grew more serious. Even the fact that he's been tracking your career for 3 years, that he knew exactly who you were when he approached you on that street corner? Sophia stared at him, uncomprehending. What are you talking about? You think it was coincidence that Alexander appeared with our grandfather's watch at exactly the moment you needed a lifeline? James shook his head slowly. Oh, Sophia, for someone so intelligent, you can be remarkably naive. You're lying, she said flatly. James reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a familiar photograph, the image of Sophia and James together in Geneva. Recognize this? It's a copy of the one you kept, the one Alexander found in your bag. Sophia's confusion deepened. How do you have that? Because Alexander has had it for 3 years, since shortly after you left Geneva. James's expression held a mixture of triumph and something like genuine concern. He's been watching you, Sophia, waiting for the perfect moment to use you against me. That doesn't make any sense, Sophia protested, though doubt had begun to creep into her mind. Why would he? Because that's what we Blackwoods do, James interrupted. We use people as pawns in our personal wars. I used you to access Francois's connections. Alexander is using you to undermine my position at Kronos. Different methods, same family playbook. He stepped closer, his voice softening. I'm not proud of how I treated you, Sophia, but at least I'm honest about my manipulations now. Can Alexander say the same? Sophia felt as if the ground were shifting beneath her feet. James was manipulative, self-serving. She knew this from bitter experience, but his accusation held just enough plausibility to plant seeds of doubt. Alexander had appeared in her life with impeccable timing, offering exactly what she most desperately needed. I don't believe you, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. James smiled sadly. Ask him yourself. Ask him how he knew to find you on that particular street corner. Ask him why he's had a file on you for 3 years. He gestured toward the door. Or join me for lunch and I'll tell you everything I know about my brother's long game. Sophia hesitated, torn between dismissing James's claims outright and the growing uncertainty they had created. If Alexander had been tracking her, if their meeting had been orchestrated rather than serendipitous. Her phone chimed with a message. Alexander. Still in meetings. James mentioned lunch at Châteauvieux. It's excellent. Will try to join if I can. A. The casual confirmation of James's lunch plan only deepened her confusion. Was Alexander truly tied up with financial matters, or was he deliberately creating space for James to sow discord? "Well?" James prompted, watching her internal struggle with evident interest. "Shall we discuss my brother over lunch, or would you prefer to continue pretending he's so different from me?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications and the weight of their shared history. Sophia stared at the photograph in James's hand, her mind racing. If Alexander had been tracking her for years, if their meeting had been orchestrated rather than serendipitous, everything between them was built on deception. "I'll join you for lunch," she said finally. "But not at Chateauvieux, somewhere public." James's smile faltered slightly. "As you wish. There's a cafe near the lake that should suffice." As they drove into Geneva, Sophia texted Alexander, "Having lunch with James. Need to discuss something important when you're free." His response came almost immediately. "Everything okay? Can break free if needed." The prompt reply only added to her confusion. If he were truly manipulating her as James claimed, wouldn't he encourage her time with his brother, knowing James would try to drive them apart? "I'm fine," she responded. "We'll see you after." The cafe James chose was busy enough to ensure privacy through ambient noise, yet quiet enough for conversation. Once they were seated with coffee, Sophia went straight to the point. "Explain exactly what you're claiming about Alexander." James leaned back, studying her with the calculated intensity she remembered from their time together. "After you left Geneva, I was distraught. In my own way," he added at her skeptical expression. "I spoke about you often, especially to Alexander during our weekly calls." "You discussed me with your brother?" Sophia found this difficult to believe given what she knew of their relationship. "Not in detail, but I mentioned losing someone special because of my own stupidity." James shrugged. Alexander was going through the Victoria engagement then. He understood regret. "This doesn't explain how he supposedly obtained my photograph or tracked me for years." "Patience, Sophia," James chided gently. "After I returned to New York, I discovered Alexander had initiated a search for you, not through official Blackwood channels but using his personal security team." "Why would he do that?" "Initially, I thought he was trying to help me find you, a rare, brotherly gesture." James's expression darkened. "Then I discovered he'd created a file on you. Your background, your financial difficulties, your struggling shop." Sophia's stomach tightened. "That doesn't make sense. Why would Alexander care about a random woman his brother dated briefly?" "Because of François Joubert." The name hung between them, unexpected and confusing. "François? What does he have to do with this?" James took a sip of his coffee, clearly enjoying her confusion. "Anton showed you the photograph in the archive, didn't he? Our father with François?" "Yes, but what Anton doesn't know, what few people know, is that François Joubert once designed exclusive timepieces for select Blackwood clients, until our father ended their partnership rather acrimoniously." Sophia shook her head. "François never mentioned knowing your father personally." "Of course not. Professional discretion." James leaned forward. "Alexander has been trying to rebuild the Blackwood-Joubert connection for years. When he learned you were François' protégé, you became valuable beyond your connection to me. So you're claiming Alexander tracked me for 3 years, waiting for the perfect moment to approach me, all to reconnect with François?" Sophia couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "And to undermine me at Kronos," James added. "2 birds, 1 stone. Very efficient, very Alexander." Something didn't add up. "If that's true, why didn't he approach me sooner? My shop was open for 2 years before it closed." "Because you were still successful then. He needed you vulnerable, desperate." James's expression softened with what appeared to be genuine regret. "Blackwood Properties' acquisition of your building, the subsequent rent increase that forced you out, those weren't coincidences, Sophia." The accusation struck her like a physical blow. "You're saying Alexander deliberately ruined me?" He created the circumstances that made you receptive to his offer. James held up a hand as she began to protest. I know how it sounds. I didn't believe it either until I found the file in his office. The surveillance photos, the reports on your financial situation, the strategically timed rent increase. I want to see this file, Sophia demanded. That can be arranged, James replied smoothly. But first, ask yourself, has Alexander ever explained exactly how he found you that day? How he knew you could repair a complex vintage watch on a street corner? How convenient his grandfather's watch happened to break when you needed a lifeline? Doubt crept through Sophia's mind like poison. The timing had been remarkably fortuitous. Alexander's appearance in her life had seemed almost miraculous. The perfect opportunity at her lowest moment. Too perfect, perhaps. Even if what you're saying is true, she said slowly, why tell me now? What do you gain? James's expression grew unexpectedly serious. Believe it or not, I've developed something resembling a conscience in the past 3 years. I hurt you, Sophia. I won't pretend otherwise. But Alexander's manipulation is more calculated, more damaging than anything I did. Before she could respond, her phone chimed with a text from Alexander. Meeting finished early. Where are you? Need to speak with you urgently. Sophia stared at the message, torn between growing suspicion of Alexander and lingering distrust of James. I need to go, she said, rising abruptly. Think about what I've told you, James urged. Ask him about the file. Watch his reaction. I intend to, Sophia replied coolly. As she left the cafe, conflicting emotions warred within her. Part of her dismissed James's accusations as another manipulation, another game in the brothers' endless competition. Yet doubt had taken root, forcing her to question every interaction with Alexander since that first meeting on the street corner. Had it all been orchestrated? The job offer, the growing personal connection? Was it all strategic manipulation from a man who viewed her as a pawn rather than a person? Outside, François Joubert stood waiting beside a vintage Citroën, his expression grave. François? Sophia stopped in surprise. What are you doing here? Alexander called me, the old watchmaker replied. He said you might need a friend today. He opened the passenger door. Come, there are things you should know. François drove in silence for several minutes, navigating Geneva's narrow streets with practiced ease. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with memory. Alexander called me the day he found you on that street corner, he began. He was emotional. Said he'd found you fixing watches on the sidewalk after searching for nearly 3 years. Sophia tensed. So it's true? He was tracking me? Not in the way James suggests. François turned onto a quiet road along the lake. Alexander began searching for you after I mentioned your name during a conversation about talented watchmakers who had left the industry. I had lost track of you after you fled Geneva and was lamenting the waste of your talent. You spoke to Alexander about me? Sophia couldn't hide her surprise. I consult for Blackwood on their finest timepieces, François explained. Have done for years, since reconciling with the family after Richard's death. Alexander and I often discuss the state of the industry, promising talents. He pulled the car to a stop overlooking the lake. When Alexander realized you were the same woman James had been involved with, he became determined to find you, not to use you, Sophia, to right a wrong. What wrong? François sighed heavily. The night you found James with Elise Dupont, that was no accident. James deliberately arranged for you to walk in on them. What? Sophia felt as if the air had been knocked from her lungs. Why would he do that? Because you were becoming too influential with my collector clients, François said simply. Several were more interested in your restoration work than in James's investment opportunities. He needed you gone, but in a way that wouldn't implicate him professionally. So he orchestrated our breakup, Sophia whispered, the pieces falling into place. But what about Alexander? The file James mentioned exists, François confirmed. But not as James described it. Alexander was trying to help you, Sophia. When he discovered his brother's company owned your building, he intervened to prevent the rent increase, but it was too late. The notice had been sent. Your shop was already closing. But why wouldn't Alexander tell me this? Would you have believed him? Francois asked gently. Would you have trusted a Blackwood again, knowing one had already betrayed you? Or would you have seen it as manipulation, pity, or worse? Sophia fell silent, considering. Francois was right. She wouldn't have trusted Alexander's motives had she known the full history. James is playing his final card, Francois continued. He knows he's losing control of Kronos. He knows Alexander has discovered financial irregularities. Most importantly, he sees how Alexander looks at you and how you look at Alexander. And how is that? Sophia asked quietly. Francois's weathered face softened, like two people who recognize something rare in each other, something worth protecting. Her phone chimed again. Alexander, asking to meet at Francois's workshop. The old watchmaker smiled knowingly. I told him to give you space, to let me explain first. Francois started the car. Shall we go to him now? Alexander was standing at Francois's workbench when they arrived, examining a disassembled movement with focused attention. He looked up as they entered, relief washing over his features at the sight of Sophia. You're here, he said simply. Francois tactfully excused himself, closing the workshop door behind him. James told me about the file, Sophia said without preamble, about you tracking me for years. Alexander's expression faltered, but he nodded. Not exactly as he described it, I imagine, but yes. After Francois mentioned you, I tried to find you. When I realized you were the woman James had hurt, you felt responsible, Sophia finished. In a way, Blackwood had already caused you pain once. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. When I found you on that street corner, it wasn't planned. My grandfather's watch genuinely stopped working, but I recognized you immediately from the photographs I'd seen. So you orchestrated our meeting? No, Alexander said firmly. I seized an opportunity fate provided. There's a difference. Sophia studied him, looking for signs of the calculation James had described. She found only raw honesty in his gaze. Why didn't you tell me you knew who I was? Would you have trusted me? Alexander asked, echoing Francois's words. Or would you have seen it as another Blackwood manipulation? The question hung between them, its answer obvious to them both. I planned to tell you everything after Geneva, Alexander continued. Once you'd seen Kronos, met with Francois, made your own assessment of the opportunity. He stepped closer. I wanted you to choose Kronos for its own merits, not because of any perceived obligation. And James? The financial irregularities you mentioned? Alexander's expression hardened. James has been systematically siphoning funds from Kronos for years. The urgent meeting today confirmed it. We've frozen his accounts pending a full investigation. So his accusations against you were a desperate attempt to discredit you before you exposed him, Sophia realized. Partly. Alexander's voice softened, but also to drive you away from me. James has always taken what matters to me, Sophia. He recognized that you do. The simple admission made her heart skip. I matter to you? More than I expected. Alexander closed the distance between them. More than is wise, perhaps, given our professional relationship, but I stopped fighting it somewhere between New York and Geneva. Sophia felt the last of her doubts dissolving under the intensity of his gaze. What happens now? With Kronos? With James? James will face consequences for his financial improprieties, though likely not legal ones. Family reputation, Alexander explained with a grimace. He'll be removed from Kronos operations permanently. And us? Our professional relationship? That's entirely your decision, Alexander replied. The creative director position is yours regardless of anything personal between us. Your talent and vision are what Kronos needs. And what do you need, Alexander? Sophia asked softly. His hand came up to touch her face, mirroring their moment outside her hotel room door. I think you know. This time, when Sophia rose on her toes, her lips found his rather than his cheek. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with months of contained emotion. Alexander's arms encircled her, pulling her closer as if afraid she might still slip away. When they finally separated, breathless and slightly dazed, Sophia found herself smiling. François will be unbearably smug about this. Alexander laughed, the sound warm and genuine. He's earned the right. He recognized what was happening between us before I did. Before we both did, Sophia corrected, realizing how completely her life had transformed in less than 2 weeks. From fixing watches on a street corner to creative director of Kronos. From avoiding all connection to the Blackwood name to finding unexpected healing with a man who shared it. But nothing of his brother's nature. The path forward wouldn't be simple. There would be complications, professional boundaries to navigate, James's continued presence in the periphery, the challenge of revitalizing a struggling brand. But for the first time in years, Sophia felt completely certain of her direction. François Joubert had taught her that the finest timepieces were those that balanced complexity with clarity of purpose. Perhaps the same was true of life's most meaningful relationships. Intricate in their components, but ultimately driven by a singular, powerful force that kept everything in perfect motion. Shall we go back to the hotel? Alexander suggested, his fingers intertwining with hers. We have plans to finalize for Kronos. And other matters to discuss, Sophia added with a smile. As they left the workshop, François looked up from a movement he was adjusting, his eyes twinkling with satisfaction at their clasped hands. The old watchmaker nodded once, a silent blessing from the man who had guided Sophia's hands through the most intricate complexities of horology, and who had, perhaps unknowingly, guided her heart as well. Outside, Geneva spread before them, the same city where Sophia had once experienced her greatest professional triumph and deepest personal betrayal. Now it offered a new beginning, a chance to reclaim not just her career but the joy she'd once found in this place. Alexander squeezed her hand gently. Ready? Sophia nodded, no longer afraid of what awaited. Ready. Together, they stepped forward into a future neither had anticipated but both now embraced, a testament to time's capacity not just for measurement, but for healing, transformation, and unexpected second chances. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.